Chapter 195. Hua Sanlu, come out. A woman in red stood on top of the archway. Her cold voice reached everyone's ears, and everyone looked over in shock. Hua Sanlu was the Grand Pavilion Master of the 9 Pavilions. He was also the 5th most powerful expert in the world. Even the royal family of Great Xia treated him with respect and addressed him as Mr. Hua. When had he ever been yelled at like this before? Following which, the crowd erupted. Regardless of whether it was the old farmers walking on the street vendors, the shop owners, or the gorgeously dressed lady boss, all of them rushed out. It was as if countless locusts were leaping up from the streets. One by one, they leaped onto the roofs. The scene was spectacular. Following which, they saw a woman in red standing on top of the archway that everyone treasured. Everyone started cursing. Some of them even tore off their peaceful facade and bared their fangs. Who's that? How dare you? Come down and beg for forgiveness. Get lost. A man thrust his sword at the woman in red on top of the archway. That strike was filled with a cold glint. Many people recognized this man. He was at the middle level of the earth will level and was considered pretty strong in the 9 pavilions. Most importantly, he was very young. He was only 22 years old and was likely to become a pavilion master in the future. Even though he wouldn't reach the level of Grand Pavilion Master Hua Sanlu, it was entirely possible for him to reach the level of the other pavilion masters. This man's swordsmanship wasn't fancy either. For 15 years, since he was 7 years old, he only knew one move, thrust. Not only was it fast, but it was also ruthless. Even someone at the same level as him wouldn't be able to block his thrust. This woman was an expert. Otherwise, she wouldn't even be able to pass through the crowd outside the archway. However, everyone felt that this woman would be in a sorry state even if she wasn't injured by this strike. Nevertheless, everyone moved closer to her and waited for her to fall before teaching her a lesson. Many people saw the woman's face clearly and were shocked. There was actually such a woman in this world. They had to spare her life later, clang. Everyone didn't see how the woman made her move. The strike that everyone thought would be extremely difficult to block flew into the air. The man was also sent flying and smashed into a house. This also made many people realize that this person wasn't only an expert, but he was also an absolute expert. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to block this strike so easily. At this moment, a shout came from the back of the crowd. Who dares to cause trouble here? When he said the first word, he was still at the back of the crowd. When he said the last word, there was already another person on the roof not far away from the archway. He was about 40 years old, wearing a green robe and a scholar's headband. There was a 3-foot beard on his chin, and he looked refined. He looked like a scholar from Great Xia. As a matter of fact, he was a scholar in the past. Coincidentally, he entered the 9 pavilions and became one of the pavilion masters. 8th Pavilion Master. Everyone greeted. The 8th Pavilion Lord, Zhang Zijiang, stared at the girl not far away. A look of astonishment flashed in his eyes. Such a graceful girl with such outstanding skills, it was impossible for her to be a nobody. Who are you? Why did you cause trouble in the 9 pavilions? Ask Hua Sanlu to come out. The lady in red merely glanced at him from the corner of her eyes before ignoring him. This attitude showed that she didn't care about Zhang Zijiang at all. Arrogant. Everyone cursed. Zhang Zijiang's face also darkened. When he was young, his family was poor, so he hated being ignored. Those who ignored him in the past, after he became proficient in martial arts, came knocking on his door and killed them all. Among all the pavilion masters in the 9 pavilions, Zhang Zijiang was the most narrow-minded. If you want to meet the great pavilion master, I will have to test your skills first. Before he finished his sentence, he leaped up, and a pair of steel claws appeared in his hands, gleaming with a cold light. Seeing Zhang Zijiang make his move, everyone was relieved. No matter how capable this lady was, she wouldn't be able to win against the 8th Pavilion Master. Although the 8th Pavilion Master was only ranked 91st in the world, it also meant that there were only 90 people in the world who could defeat him. How many martial artists were there in the world? Just this fact alone was enough for him to be ranked 91st, was enough for him to be proud of. Although the Empress ignored him, she could tell that he had some skills. If she stood still, the archway would be destroyed, which would create a huge enmity. After all, she was here for the antidote. With a move, the Empress directly went up to meet him. Both parties collided in the air. Before anyone could see clearly, Zhang Zijiang was smashed to the ground like a cannonball. Hiss! Everyone was stunned and took a deep breath in unison. The 91st in the world actually only had one face-to-face encounter with this lady. Who was this lady? Which woman was so powerful? The third most powerful woman in the world, Li Yuanzhu. Impossible. Although she lived in seclusion, she had the image of a Taoist nun. The 7th most powerful woman in the world, Qi Zixiao. How could the Empress of Dayou be here? The 12th most powerful woman in the world, Sun Mingyang. That woman seemed to be in her 40s. However, it was said that she had a technique to preserve her youthful looks, so it was hard to say. While everyone was in shock and guessing, Zhang Zijiang, who had smashed a hole in the ground, spat out a mouthful of blood and was shocked. Others couldn't see clearly, but he knew that the two of them exchanged 3 moves just now. However, that woman was too fast and too powerful. She didn't seem like a woman at all, but more like a giant beast. His hands were still numb after being hit by her. If she hadn't used her full strength at the last moment, he would have been seriously injured. Even if a woman from Great Xia was stronger than him, she wouldn't be able to make him feel completely helpless with just her strength alone. This woman wasn't from Great Xia. There was only one such woman in the world, Qi Zixiao. At the thought of this, he was horrified. With a flip, he jumped out of the hole. He landed on the ground, stared at the Empress and said, "Qi Zixiao, why are you here?" After hearing what he said, everyone immediately stared at the Empress. It was actually Qi Zixiao. The Empress of Dayou actually appeared here. Some of them had evil thoughts when they saw her face. At this moment, all these evil thoughts flowed out along with their cold sweat. A person's reputation was like the shadow of a tree. Who would dare to have any ideas about Qi Zixiao? Hua Sanlu, I'm here, aren't you going to come out and welcome me? The Empress didn't hide anymore and directly transmitted her cold voice. At this moment, some of the people who were wholeheartedly cultivating and ignoring the outside world also jumped onto the roof. There were only a few people in the world who called themselves Emperor. And there was only one woman. When this voice spread out, the entire 9 pavilions was in an uproar. I didn't expect you to personally come here, Qi Zixiao. Your presence really brings light to my humble 9 pavilions. A feminine voice came from afar. Following which, a figure flashed in the air and appeared in front of everyone. As he landed, a few other figures jumped out from the pagoda and landed behind him. Chapter 196. In front of the crowd was a man in a flowery robe. His hair was loose, his face was powdered, and there was even a cinnabar dot between his eyebrows. He was considered handsome, but his body was filled with a gloomy aura. This man was the 9 pavilions Grand Pavilion Master, Hua Sanlu. He looked like he was in his early 20s, but in fact, he was already over 50. There were 8 people standing behind him. They were all different in height, weight, and weight. There was an old man who was getting old, and there was also a young girl who was about 16. These 9 people occupied the top 100 positions in the world. It could also be said that they were notorious. After the 8th pavilion master, Zhang Ziliu, mastered martial arts, he killed everyone who looked down on him. The old man in his 70s or 80s was the 4th pavilion master, Lu Wu. When he was young, he killed his parents and fed their bodies to the dogs. The woman who looked like a young girl was the 5th pavilion master, Shi Qingjiao. She had once gone down the mountain to hide her identity and marry a rich man's son. On the night of the wedding, she killed everyone and left. Initially, some people thought that she did it because of hatred or emotional entanglements. However, she said, "I fell in love with him the moment I saw him. I wished I could stay with him until my hair turned white. However, I suddenly didn't like him anymore, so I killed him." The others also had different kinds of evil deeds. However, they didn't cause much of an impact. The 9 pavilions were powerful, and even if there were people who didn't like them, they couldn't do anything to them. The pavilion master is here. Greetings, pavilion master. When everyone saw so many rare people gathered here, they were in awe. At this moment, they were sizing up Qi Zixiao, the legendary lady. Qi Zixiao stared at Hua Sanlu. "Oh my, what day is it today for such a distinguished guest to come to my 9 pavilions? If I had known earlier, I would have gone out to welcome you. I just don't know why you, the Empress of Dayou, are here. Aren't you afraid that you won't be able to return?" Hua Sanlu smiled mysteriously and spoke in an exaggerated tone. "Give me the antidote for half-dead. Tell me what you want." The Empress didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the point. Half-dead. Is there an antidote for that?" Hua Sanlu was surprised. He then looked behind him suspiciously and asked, "Is there an antidote for half-dead? Why didn't I know about this? Since Grand Pavilion Master hasn't heard of it, then there's naturally no such thing." Shi Qingjiao covered her mouth and chuckled. Upon hearing this, the Empress's heart tightened and her murderous aura soared into the sky. If there was no antidote in the half-dead state, would that person be like a wooden man in the future? Yeah, I remember now. There seems to be an antidote. My memory has been getting worse these past 2 years. However, I'm very curious. Who was the one who was afflicted with this half-dead poison that made you, the Empress of Dayou, personally come over to ask for it?" Hua Sanlu chuckled. "I heard that you've been raising a gigolo recently. Could it be him? In the entire imperial court of Dayou, apart from Hongwu, there is probably no one else worthy of your attention." The Empress exuded a cold aura, and the surrounding temperature dropped by a few degrees. There was even a gust of wind blowing, causing the Empress's hair to flutter. "Give me the antidote." The Empress's voice was devoid of warmth. "Yeah, you're the one begging me now. I'm so scared when you talk like that," Hua Sanlu said in a weird tone. Everyone burst into laughter. If they saw Qi Zixiao outside, they really wouldn't dare to do anything. But here, with Hua Sanlu, who was more powerful than Qi Zixiao, around, no one had the slightest bit of fear. To be able to laugh at the 7th most powerful expert in the world and see her suffer a setback, they might not have such an opportunity again in this lifetime. The Empress frowned slightly and the coldness in her body intensified. This Hua Sanlu was indeed the most ungraceful and disgusting one among the top 10 experts in Dayou. If it wasn't for the fact that she still wanted to get the antidote, she would have beaten him up without a second thought. "Give me the antidote and you can state your conditions," the Empress said again. So generous, so awe-inspiring. As expected of Qi Zixiao. "Since you said so, I'll state my conditions now." Hua Sanlu had a weird smile on his face. He pointed at the Empress and said, "I want you." Everyone laughed again. At this moment, a layer of ice could be scraped off the Empress's face. "That gigolo you are raising. Give him to me, I'll save him and he'll stay with me. How about that? I'm very curious about a man who can even charm someone like you." Hua Sanlu changed his tone and said. You're courting death. The Empress clenched her fists and said. In her entire life, who had ever spoken to her like this? If you brought along 1,500 winged cavalry warriors or Hongwu, I might not have dared to do it. But you came by yourself, why wouldn't I dare? Hua Sanlu laughed. What conditions do I have to give you the antidote? The Empress clenched her teeth and asked. Pfft, Ayaya, you're really cute. You actually haven't fallen out with me yet. It seems like that person is really important. There aren't many opportunities like this, I have to think about it carefully. Hua Sanlu laughed again. Go, bring me the antidote, Hua Sanlu suddenly said to the person behind him. The 9th Pavilion Master, Zhu Lang, was plump and looked like a rich man. He had been wiping his sweat since he arrived. At this moment, after hearing Hua Sanlu's words, he immediately sighed and ran to the back. His movements weren't fast, but every step he took caused the ground to shake. It made people wonder if the 9th Pavilion Master's body was made of metal. Otherwise, how could he be so heavy? However, Zhu Lang was the person who researched medicine the most in the 9 pavilions. The place fell into silence for a moment. Hua Sanlu was racking his brains. What exactly did he want? After a while, Zhu Lang ran back again with a small box in his hand and threw it to Hua Sanlu. Do you want it? Hua Sanlu raised his head and looked at the Empress while playing with the box. Do you want it very much? State your conditions. The Empress looked at the box and her expression loosened a little. No matter what, as long as she brought the box back, she would be able to save him. Conditions, I can't think of anything. I suddenly realized that I don't seem to want anything. If I like women, I might be able to have some fun with you. But I don't even like women, what else do I want? Hua Sanlu suddenly felt vexed. I suddenly feel that my life is very boring. I don't like men, I don't like women, and I don't like gold and silver. Don't you guys think that it's very boring? Hua Sanlu turned his head and looked at the people behind him. It's indeed boring, simply too boring. A burly man who looked like he was cast from steel nodded his head in agreement. If it were me, I would just die, a skinny man who looked like a bamboo pole said sinisterly. Ayaya, this is a good idea, this is a good idea. When Hua Sanlu heard this, it was as if he had suddenly heard something funny and laughed cheerfully. He threw the box to Zhu Lang, raised his head and looked at the Empress with a sneer. How about this, if you kill me, the thing will be yours. If you can't kill me, I will peel off your skin and make it into the most beautiful doll. I will place it here for everyone to see. How about that? The Empress let go of the black backpack and hung it on the archway. Then, she pounced toward Hua Sanlu. Chapter 197. At this moment, the Empress squinted her eyes and pounced on Hua Sanlu. If she wasn't waiting for the antidote, she wouldn't have been able to control herself. In the entire Dayo, who dared to speak to her like this? Outside of Dayo, who dared to speak to her like this? Do you really think that I can't touch you just because you're the 5th most powerful expert in the world? Do you really think that I can't beat you to death? Do you want to die? I'll beat you to death right now. At this moment, the Empress turned into an arrow in everyone's eyes. They could only see a blurry shadow, and from this, they could see the Empress's speed. Before anyone could react, she exchanged a few blows with Hua Sanlu, who was on the ground. Following a loud bang, both of them were sent flying. Those who didn't have time to react were sent flying by the explosion. Other than the archway behind the Empress, all the other buildings collapsed with a loud bang. Only the archway, which looked old and colorful, wasn't affected at all. Even the black bag hanging on the archway wasn't affected at all. Everyone was overwhelmed with shock. Was this the strength of the top 10 experts in the world? The Empress did a somersault and fell from the sky. When Hua Sanlu landed, he stomped on the heads of 3 people in succession before stabilizing himself. However, he didn't seem to care at all. Instead, he laughed and said, "Interesting, really interesting." At the same time, he leaped more than 10 meters high before pouncing on the Empress. In everyone's eyes, an incomparably huge pitch-black saber appeared in the sky and slashed down with boundless momentum. Just that aura alone was enough to make many people unable to move. This was an ability that only a few spirit will experts could master and use, the embodiment of the spirit, or rather, God martial arts. After passing the heavenly barrier, one could advance to the God level. The difference between the God level and the previous ones was that the God level cultivator cultivated the spirit and condensed all the essence, chi, and spirit in the body into God martial arts. Only after condensing God martial arts could one be considered a true top-notch expert. God martial arts was their strongest means of fighting the enemy. However, condensing God martial arts was a bottleneck for most people. Some spirit will experts even died because of this. This kind of thing happened frequently. Faced with this mountain-splitting saber, the Empress could even feel the sharpness of the saber. Both her eyes and even her hair turned blood red. This was the manifestation of the condensation of the blood and chi in the Aboriginal's body. The practitioners from the other countries would switch to practicing God martial arts after reaching the spirit will level, but the Aboriginals would always activate the power of their bloodline and spread the power of their blood throughout their bodies. This was the biggest difference between the two. The Empress clenched her fist and met the attack head-on. A series of loud noises rang out in the air. From below, everyone could only see a long black saber being wielded by a giant's arm as it continuously collided with a red figure. Explosions rang out incessantly, but every time they collided, the red figure would be pushed back a little. To think that the female Empress, who was known for her strength, was being suppressed by Hua Sanlu. As the two of them fought, the crowd below could no longer stand still and retreated into the distance. There was even one person who retreated a little too slowly and suddenly exploded into a shower of blood that filled the sky. At the same time, numerous blade marks that were a full foot deep appeared on the ground. This caused everyone to scramble to escape, afraid that they would be affected by the battle. Just the leaking sharp chi alone was enough to cause such damage to the ground. One could well imagine what kind of situation the Empress was in. As the two of them fought, even the other 8 pavilion masters had no choice but to retreat a little. They were deeply shocked by the strength of the two. Even though they already knew that Hua Sanliu's strength was unfathomable, no one expected it to be to this extent. Perhaps only the combined strength of the 8 pavilion masters would be able to contend against him. Boom! With another loud noise, the Empress was sent flying. She adjusted her body in mid-air and landed on a huge rock that was more than 100 meters away. As her feet landed on the ground, the huge rock beneath her feet cracked with a loud bang. The Empress raised her hand and saw that there were already a few shallow bloodstains on her fist. At this moment, there were also a few more wounds on her body. "How can you kill me with just this amount of strength? Tell me, how can you kill me?" Hua Sanlu laughed maniacally in the air. At this moment, the Empress's eyes and long hair were all blood red. Her shoes had long been shattered and she was standing there barefooted. Phew! Phew! What's that sound? The person who spoke was the burly man who looked like he was made of steel. He was the 3rd pavilion master, Zhong Feng. He seemed to have heard something. "It's coming from that side." Shi Qingjiao looked at the direction where the Empress was standing with a serious face. At this moment, the Empress's aura was rising continuously, giving people the feeling that a ferocious beast was awakening. "It's the sound of breathing," another pavilion master said in disbelief. This breathing sound gave him the feeling that a huge beast was breathing. It gave people the feeling that a huge beast was suppressing its bloodthirsty madness before attacking and accumulating energy in its body. At this moment, the Empress's body changed again. Strange patterns began to appear on her skin and covered her entire body. The Empress opened her mouth slightly, and as she breathed, a white mist was spat out from her mouth like an arrow before dissipating. Hua Sanlu, who was in the air, realized that something was amiss earlier than the others. Previously, Qi Zixiao's strength made him feel a little strange. Even though she was strong, she seemed to be weaker than the seventh most powerful expert in the world. After he had condensed his god of martial arts, the speed at which she fell into a disadvantageous position was too fast. At this moment, he realized that Qi Zixiao had actually not used her full strength all along. Now, Qi Zixiao's aura was a notch higher than before and was still growing. She was about to reach the point where she could compete with him as an equal. What kind of martial arts was this that could actually increase her strength by a notch in such a short period of time? Interrupt her, we can't let her continue. Hua Sanlu suddenly had this thought. Die. Following Hua Sanlu's shout, his god of martial arts transformed into countless saber shadows and slashed at the Empress, who was standing on the huge rock. Phew. As the Empress exhaled a long breath, when she raised her head again, there was no longer any black color in her eyes. Her face was also covered with blood-red patterns. Roar! The Empress suddenly let out a roar and disappeared in an instant. When she reappeared, she was already in midair. She clenched her fists and faced the countless saber shadows. Boom, 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 boom. A series of loud collisions almost set off a sound wave. This time, even the 8 pavilion masters couldn't see what was happening on the battlefield. They could only see a black light that seemed to be engulfing everything. Occasionally, they would see a red dot at the edge of that black light, which proved that the person was still there. The Empress's fists collided with that ball of black light over and over again. Indiscernibly, cracks began to appear on the edge of that huge black saber. Following which, the cracks became bigger and bigger until they covered the entire saber. Roar! In midair, the Empress let out a roar that sounded like that of an ancient giant beast. She ferociously punched that black saber, and that long saber in midair suddenly shattered into countless pieces. A figure was thrown far away. Grand Pavilion Master, everyone cried out involuntarily. Roar! In an instant, the Empress disappeared from the sky. Following which, she appeared above Hua Sanlu, who was thrown into the air. She punched Hua Sanlu's chest and smashed him down. The Empress followed him down like a shadow, punching him again and again. A black shield appeared in front of Hua Sanlu and barely blocked the Empress's fists. At this moment, Hua Sanlu was violently vomiting blood. Even his 5 orifices were bleeding. Bang, bang, bang. Save Grand Pavilion Master, the second Pavilion Master shouted loudly. The 8 of them looked at each other, but no one actually took a step forward. At this moment, Qi Zixiao was obviously not right. Even Grand Pavilion Master Hua Sanlu had been defeated. At this moment, it was better for someone else to test the waters. All 8 of them thought so. Therefore, none of them moved. In the next moment, all 8 of them leaped out at the same time. A thin sword appeared in the hands of the second Pavilion Master, Jiang Hailu. The body of the third Pavilion Master, Zhong Feng, emitted a metallic luster. A long rod appeared in the hands of the fourth Pavilion Master, Lu Wang. Everyone had already condensed their god skills, but they had yet to reach the stage where they could enlarge and release their god skills like Hua Sanlu. They could only maintain stability when the god skills were formed in their hands. Bang! The Empress turned around in mid-air and ruthlessly stomped on Hua Sanlu's body. Immediately, a cloud of blood exploded in mid-air. The 8 people who had just leaped out immediately stopped in their tracks. Everyone's eyeballs were about to pop out. How was this possible? The 5th most powerful expert in the world, Hua Sanlu, was actually beaten up. After the Empress beat up Hua Sanlu, she suddenly lost all her strength and fell to the ground. She barely managed to stabilize her body, and the veins on her body began to gradually disappear. However, her eyes were still suffused with blood. She raised her head and looked at everyone. "Give me the antidote." Her voice was still cold. The might that she showed when she beat up Hua Sanlu was really terrifying. However, everyone could hear the frailty in her voice. The martial arts she used just now consumed too much of her energy. She can't hold on any longer. "Everyone from the 9 pavilions, kill her. You will be rewarded handsomely," everyone shouted, and their voices spread throughout the entire arena. "Kill." Thousands of figures immediately rushed toward the Empress after hearing the order. Chapter 199. Kill her and avenge Grand Pavilion Master. Everyone shouted. The 9 pavilions had always been able to stand tall in the world because every generation's Grand Pavilion Master was ranked among the top 10 experts in the world. Furthermore, the other pavilion masters were not to be underestimated. Now that Grand Pavilion Master Hua Sanlu was actually dead, it was imaginable how shocked everyone in the 9 pavilions was. Everyone's eyes were filled with fear and murderous intent. They were afraid of Qi Zixiao's strength, but they were also filled with murderous intent. The 9 pavilions' illustrious reputation was not only earned by the pavilion masters, but also by the disciples who were like mad dogs that wanted to bite their opponents even if they died. Furthermore, everyone could see that the Empress's body was unstable. Following the shouts of "seriously injured" and "kill," everyone rushed toward the Empress with bloodshot eyes. Among them, the fastest one wasn't anyone else but the fat, slow-moving 9th Pavilion Master Zhu Lang. He took a deep breath, and his entire body became even fatter. Following which, he leaped into the air like a meteorite and smashed toward the Empress with a whistling sound. The Empress raised her head and saw thousands of people rushing toward her. Her eyes were filled with coldness and murderous intent. "You guys are courting death." However, the most important thing right now was Zhu Lang, who was smashing toward her like a meteorite. The Empress pinched her fingers and made a series of crisp sounds. Just now, she suddenly displayed astonishing strength and defeated Hua Sanlu, who was ranked above her. However, she paid a hefty price for it. The burst of power just now caused her internal organs to suffer great damage. Now that the power had receded, the feeling of weakness and pain alternated from every part of her body to her brain. Now that her strength had dropped to 30% of her peak, she needed at least a month to recover from the damage she suffered and return to her peak. The pain from every bone and muscle in her body made her movements much slower. Facing Zhu Lang, who was smashing down from the sky, the Empress did not dodge. Instead, she clenched her teeth and threw a punch at him. "I am Qi Zixiao, how can I be underestimated by all of you?" the Empress thought to herself with a gaze as sharp as a knife. The moment her fist collided with Zhu Lang, the Empress felt Zhu Lang's body go limp. Her fist was directly wrapped in fat, and that fat was still trembling as it absorbed her strength. Bang! After the collision, Zhu Lang was sent flying into the air like a ball. The ground beneath the Empress's feet cracked. The other person, whose entire body was covered in a metallic luster, charged toward the Empress like a raging bull. It was the 3rd Pavilion Master of the 9 pavilions, Zhongfeng. Both he and Zhu Lang had fused their godly martial arts with their bodies. However, Zhongfeng's entire body seemed to be made of metal and was impervious to blades and swords. On the other hand, Zhu Lang's entire body seemed to be made of cotton that could deflect attacks. When the Empress and Zhongfeng's fists collided, a shockwave erupted from the point of contact. Zhongfeng retreated 5 to 6 steps while the Empress retreated 7 to 8 steps. This made everyone even more certain that the Empress was in a bad situation. One had to know that if the Empress was at her peak, even if Zhongfeng condensed the power of his divine martial and doubled it, it would still be difficult for him to withstand a punch from Qi Zixiao. But now, he had the upper hand. From this, it could be seen that the Empress was in a bad situation. At the same time, Shi Qingjiao appeared behind the Empress like a ghost and stabbed her waist with a pair of daggers. The Empress punched the edge of the daggers with both of her fists, producing a metallic clashing sound. 2 more bloodstains appeared on the Empress's fists. A long rod struck out from the Empress's left side, aiming at all the vital parts of the Empress's body. At the same time, a mass of sword shadows shrouded the Empress from top to bottom. The Empress had no choice but to retreat. At this point in time, she was being attacked from all directions. If she was at her peak, she wouldn't care about these people. But now that her strength had dropped to 30%, her speed had decreased significantly. The 8 pavilion masters had condensed their heaven-grade weapons and their strength had increased tremendously. For a moment, the Empress was at a disadvantage. After receiving a rod strike, the sword shadows that filled the sky caused a few bloody lines to appear on her body. She seized an opportunity to rush out of the encirclement and leap toward the archway. The Empress raised her eyebrows and her heart was filled with murderous intent. If she wasn't willing to use this poison before, she would really be left here if she didn't use it now. Furthermore, she hadn't gotten the antidote yet. She couldn't leave, let alone escape. Qi Zixiao can't hold on any longer and wants to escape. Stop her. Seeing this situation, Jiang Hailu calmed down and a glint of excitement flashed in his eyes. In front of the Empress was a swarm of disciples from the 9 pavilions. She leaped up and wanted to leap over the heads of the crowd. 20 to 30 figures leaped up at the same time, brandishing all kinds of weapons in their hands. In the next moment, those 20 to 30 figures fell like dumplings in a pot. The Empress was also blocked by this and paused for a moment. Once again, Shi Qingjiao appeared behind the Empress like a ghost and slashed 27 times consecutively, transforming into a round of sword light. Get lost. The Empress's face was as cold as snow. She turned around and smashed her fist back. Both sides separated upon contact. Shi Qingjiao let out a muffled groan as she was sent flying. The Empress's hand was bleeding. Using this punch, the Empress flew a few meters away again. More than 10 figures leaped up to intercept her. Get lost. After knocking everyone down, she stepped on someone's body and headed straight for the archway. Her target was the bag hanging on the archway. Jiang Hailu, who was chasing after her, understood that there was definitely something strange about the bag. Otherwise, why would she do such a thing? However, it was too late for him to say anything. The Empress flipped over the archway and that black bag was already in her hand. At the same time, a meatball smashed down like a meteorite. The Empress turned around in midair and kicked the ball. Even though she repelled Zhu Lang, she was smashed back to the ground and was immediately surrounded by many disciples from the 9 pavilions. The Empress took out 2 small bottles from the bag with one hand, crushed them, and poured them into her mouth. Not good, stop her. Upon seeing this, Jiang Hailu immediately thought that the Empress was taking some medicine to restore her body's condition. He hurriedly shouted, but it was too late. He could only look on helplessly as the Empress took the medicine. It will take time for the medicine to take effect. Surround and kill her. Jiang Hailu shouted and immediately pounced over. It wasn't only him who thought so. Everyone else thought so too. No one thought that the Empress would actually take the antidote to the poisonous gas. The Empress threw the bag on the ground and stepped on it. Immediately, all the bottles in the bag were smashed. The Empress kicked the bag with the tip of her foot. The bag was torn into pieces and flew toward the crowd. More than 10 people were injured by the broken glass. The bag of sarin gas was scattered in all directions and began to volatilize in the air. Only 0.5 milligrams of sarin gas was enough to kill an ordinary adult. It was colorless, odorless, and extremely volatile. The bag that the Empress was carrying was at least 10 kilograms. Scattered in this area, one could imagine the concentration of sarin gas. Chapter 200. The Empress was surrounded by 8 people. No matter who made a move, she would return it with a punch. She didn't use any fancy moves and relied entirely on brute force to defeat them. This had always been her style. No matter who her opponent was, she would kill them with a single punch. If she was at her peak, she wouldn't be afraid of these people. However, after defeating Hua Sanlu, she was at a complete disadvantage. Wounds were added to her body from time to time, and her red dress was already covered in blood. Not only was the blood flowing from her hands, but there was also a half-inch deep wound on her waist. This was left by Shi Qingjiao. She always looked for the most opportune moment to deal a fatal blow after the others attacked. If it was someone else, she would have already cut open their waist. On her shoulder, there was a wound so deep that the bone could be seen. This was left by Jiang Hailu. The Empress's face turned colder and paler. Her red lips were even more eye-catching, like blood and fire. Her gaze was still as cold as ever. Everyone admired Qi Zixiao's toughness. From the beginning to the end, there was no change in her gaze. Whether it was before or now, there was no sign of retreat or weakness. From the beginning to the end, she never flinched. However, although everyone admired her, it was more important to keep her here. Even if Hua Sanlu was dead, no one dared to underestimate the 9 pavilions. Not to mention the benefits from the great Xia imperial family. Qi Zixiao's head wasn't just priceless. She can't hold on any longer. Everyone understood that Qi Zixiao had a huge fight with Hua Sanlu. Even though it wasn't a long time, she had consumed a lot of energy. Now that she had lost so much blood, she wouldn't be able to hold on for long. At the thought of this, everyone moved faster and more ruthlessly. They even exchanged injuries for injuries and took advantage of this time to keep Qi Zixiao here. At this moment, some of the surrounding disciples of the 9 pavilions started to feel nauseous. Then, they fell to the ground. It wasn't just a few people, but more than 100 people fell to the ground. Such a commotion shocked everyone. Many people shouted their names and rushed to check, only to see their bodies twitching and foaming at the mouth. Poison. Everyone's expression changed drastically. Where did the poison come from? Qi Zixiao. Or was it someone else? But other than Qi Zixiao, who else could it be? Before everyone could figure out what exactly happened, the people around them also fell to the ground. Everyone dispersed. Although they did not know how Qi Zixiao poisoned them, they still subconsciously distanced themselves from each other. However, it was already too late. Batches of people began to fall as soon as they started moving. What would be the concentration of 10 kilograms of sarin gas after it was released? 1 kilogram of sarin gas could kill millions of people. 10 kilograms was enough to turn an area into a dead zone, not to mention in such a small area. Ordinary people would definitely die within 2 minutes if they were exposed. From the time the Empress kicked the sarin gas until now, a total of 7 minutes had passed. Excluding the time for the sarin gas to evaporate, she had been exposed to a high concentration of sarin gas for 5 minutes. The disciples of the 9 pavilions were much stronger than ordinary people. It took them 5 minutes to die, but because of this, everyone had inhaled a large amount of sarin gas. It was too late for them to escape. One by one, the disciples of the 9 pavilions ran out with terrified expressions on their faces. However, they didn't run far before they fell to the ground with their bodies twitching. The expressions of the 8 great pavilion masters changed drastically. No matter what, they had never thought that Qi Zixiao would actually poison them. Furthermore, they had no idea how she did it. Qi Zixiao, did you take the antidote just now? Jiang Hailu suddenly recalled the scene just now and immediately understood. What Qi Zixiao took just now wasn't some medicine to restore her body's condition, but an antidote. At this moment, everyone stopped and subconsciously looked at the black backpack that she had kicked into pieces. At this moment, it had turned into countless fragments that were scattered on the ground. Just now, Qi Zixiao took 2 small bottles from that backpack and drank them. Where would she find the antidote now? I have said before, all of you are courting death. The Empress looked at everyone coldly. Her breathing was somewhat rapid, and blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. It was extremely difficult for her to persevere for the past 7 minutes. Take out the antidote, Jiang Hailu shouted sternly with a glimmer of hope, even though he knew that it was very unlikely. At this moment, it was as if he had been doused with ice water, and his whole body was trembling. The faces of the others were deathly pale. Although they were still fine, it was only because they were stronger than ordinary disciples that they could persevere for a little longer. Antidote. I drank it, the Empress said faintly. This simple sentence made them tremble all over. The antidote you want is with me, and I will destroy it before I die. Zhu Lang's face turned ashen. It doesn't matter, I can go in and look for it. There must be more, the Empress said. There shouldn't be many antidotes that need to be stored in such a box. That's right, that antidote was previously stored in a very exquisite box. Presumably, it wasn't specially found by Zhu Lang. There was one more sentence that she didn't say for fear of reminding everyone. Even if the antidote was destroyed, as long as there was a little bit of residue left, it would be enough to compare the smell. Presumably, different antidotes had different ingredients and smells. I will kill you to accompany me in death. Third Pavilion Master Zhong Feng roared and rushed toward the Empress, but she dodged to the side. At this moment, she didn't need to persevere anymore. Except for a few ordinary disciples who were far away, all of them were lying on the ground. Although some of them were still twitching, they probably wouldn't be able to live much longer. These few people wouldn't be able to persevere for much longer. Even though they were at the spirit will level, they were only slightly stronger than the others. Furthermore, they had condensed their spirit martial arts and could persevere for a while longer. However, this didn't mean that they were immune to poison. Thousands of people were lying on the ground in a disorderly manner. It was a ghastly sight. The few disciples who had escaped didn't dare to stay and ran far away. No one knew how wide the range of this poison was. Zhu Lang looked like he was crying and laughing at the same time. He crushed the wooden box in his hand, turned around, and fled outside. He had a glimmer of hope in his heart that there might be a chance of survival if he left here. Seeing his actions, the others also started to move. 5 of them ran toward the periphery, while the other 4 felt that they couldn't escape death and rushed toward Qi Zixiao. Even if they were to die, they wanted to add 2 more scars to her body. However, Zhu Lang didn't even run 5 meters before he felt that it was getting harder and harder to control his body. Then, he fell to the ground. He was the weakest among them and was the first to fall. The sound of Zhu Lang falling to the ground was like a heavy hammer hitting everyone's body. Everyone had a miserable look on their faces. Behind him was Zhang Zijiang, who was about to jump over the roof, but he fell head first. The Empress calmly dodged the attacks of the last 4 people and watched as they fell one by one. You can't leave Great Xia. Jiang Hailu's eyes were filled with viciousness. After he finished speaking, he fell a few steps away from the Empress. The Empress stood there indifferently. Other than 3 to 5 people who had escaped, the rest of the people in the 9 pavilions had fallen in this kernel. She knew that she had to hurry. She understood a little about the sarin gas from the other world. With such a high concentration, it would be very dangerous even if she took the antidote. It was just that the physical condition of the aboriginals was much better than that of the spirit will experts in Great Xia. In terms of physical strength, even 5 Hua Sanlius couldn't compare to her. Coupled with the antidote, it didn't have much of an effect on her. However, if she continued to stay here, it would be hard to say. In a flash, she came to Zhu Lang's side. He was holding some of the remaining dregs in his hands. After collecting them, the Empress plunged into those few pagodas to search. After a while, she left with a few boxes. As for the legacy of the 9 pavilions, it was indeed the top legacy of Great Xia. However, she wasn't interested in it and couldn't be bothered to plunder it. Behind her, only the ghost-like 9 pavilions and countless corpses were left on the ground. Other than a few ordinary disciples who had escaped, the rest of the 9 pavilions were all dead. Chapter 201. Renbaqian was very anxious on the mountain. It was impossible to say that he wasn't worried. But other than moving his fingers, what else could he do? After waiting for at least 8 to 10 hours, Renbaqian finally saw a red figure appear in front of him. At this moment, the Empress was in a sorry state. Her white inner shirt and red chiffon skirt were torn and stained with blood. Her waist and shoulders were dripping with blood. Her face was pale and there was a trace of blood at the corner of her mouth. Zi Xiao. Renbaqian's heart tightened. Seeing the Empress in this state, it was as if his heart was stabbed. In his eyes, the Empress had always been awe-inspiring. When had she ever looked like this? When had she ever been in such a sorry state? But who was she doing this for? With such thoughts in his mind, he couldn't speak for a moment. At this moment, he threw the matter of the antidote to the back of his mind. Open your mouth. The Empress stood in front of him and said. A longan-sized pill appeared in her hand and a few boxes were thrown on the ground. Seeing that Renbaqian was still in a daze, the Empress pinched open his mouth and popped the pill in. It almost got stuck in his throat and choked him to death. Seeing that he couldn't even breathe, she quickly slapped his back to get the pill out and stuffed it into his mouth. Renbaqian chewed the pill with great difficulty and swallowed it. Then, the Empress stuffed a water bag into his mouth and drank a mouthful of water. Renbaqian didn't have any complaints about almost choking to death. The Empress had always been like this. This small matter couldn't be compared to what she had done in the past. Are your injuries serious? Renbaqian finally asked this question. I can only use 30% of my strength for 1 month. But, even with 30% of my strength, no one can stop me. The Empress was always full of confidence. But, I'm hungry. The Empress's tone changed. The battle just now caused a lot of damage to her body. At the same time, she felt a strong sense of hunger. The Aboriginals needed to rely on large amounts of food or medicinal herbs to replenish their qi and blood. Renbaqian moved his fingers but still couldn't move. The Empress looked at him and said, It will take a while for the antidote to take effect. I will go and find some food. Renbaqian nodded. The antidote wasn't an elixir and naturally wouldn't take effect immediately. He watched as the Empress left again. After the Empress left, Renbaqian tried to move his body every once in a while. However, he couldn't move at all. Just when he was doubting whether the medicine that the Empress brought back with her injuries was effective, he felt his shoulder twisting a little. Renbaqian's face immediately revealed an ecstatic expression. Although it was just a slight movement of his shoulder, he had not been able to move at all for the past 10 days. At this time, even the slightest change made him extremely sensitive and excited. This meant that the antidote was real. Following the movement of the shoulders, the forearms began to move as well, followed by the arms and the legs. When he could move his waist, he felt like he had come back to life. Renbaqian supported Qi Shui, who was beside him, and tried to stand up. Not being able to move for more than 10 days made his body feel rusty. His joints kept creaking and his legs felt weak. He felt like he was experiencing the effects of aging in advance. If he wanted to recover, he would probably have to move a lot more. While Renbaqian was moving his body, the Empress came back with a lot of meat wrapped in oiled paper. It was emitting a fragrant aroma. Seeing that Rinpochen was moving carefully, the Empress revealed a look of joy in her eyes. She had finally saved him. This was the greatest joy in her heart at this moment. Zi Xiao. Rinpochen looked at her with a face full of joy. The Empress suppressed the joy in her heart, carried the meat wrapped in oiled paper and asked, "Do you want to eat?" Her voice was clear and less cold. "Okay." Rinpochen nodded happily. As for the origin of the meat, he didn't care at all. In any case, the Empress definitely didn't have any money on her. Indeed, the Empress brought back a lot of meat and wine. Rinpochen only ate a little and quietly watched the Empress eat. It was as if he could never get enough of her. "You have worked hard," Rinpochen said sincerely. He didn't say thank you. At this moment, it was already meaningless to say thank you. The Empress raised her head and drank a mouthful of wine. She simply said, "If you lie to me in the future, I will kill you." Upon hearing this, Rinpochen couldn't stop laughing. This made the Empress a little sullen. This guy was getting more and more impudent. After a long while, Rinpochen finally stopped laughing. He looked at the Empress with a sincere face and said, "When the time comes, you won't have to do anything." The Empress remained silent and ignored him. After a while, the Empress finished eating the wine and meat. Feeling less hungry, she then said, "Let's go." Just now, 2 people ran away. We can't hide the news for long. We have to leave Great Xia before they react. Previously, 5 people ran away. The Empress caught up with 3 of them and killed them. She didn't know where the other 2 were hiding, but she couldn't be bothered to look for them. A day after the 2 of them left, a group of people arrived at the call of the 9 pavilions. Among them, the leader was a man in his 30s who was dressed in an embroidered robe. Even though the 9 pavilions was feared by many, they still had some dealings with the outside world. Otherwise, how could the Lien family be in such a desperate situation? This group of people came to the 9 pavilions for some business. However, when they walked to the mountain pass, everyone's facial expression immediately changed. From here, they could see countless corpses lying on the ground. Almost all the buildings near the gate of the 9 pavilions had collapsed. What happened here? Everyone was shocked. Someone launched a large-scale attack on the 9 pavilions. How was this possible? Who was so daring? More importantly, the 9 pavilions was like a ghost town at this moment. There wasn't the slightest movement inside. The last time they came here, there were many disciples and livestock. But now, there wasn't even a bug in sight. Everyone stood at the mountain pass and didn't know whether to advance or retreat. They wanted to go forward and check, but they were afraid that there were enemies inside. After waiting for more than an hour, there was still no sound inside. At this time, everyone mustered up their courage and went down. The more the leader in the embroidered robe walked in, the more shocked he was because the corpses lying on the ground were all disciples of the 9 pavilions. Very quickly, everyone realized that these people were all poisoned to death. The 9 pavilions were famous for their use of poison. How could there be a poison expert in this world who could actually poison the people of the 9 pavilions to death? What about Hua Sanlu? What about the other 8 pavilion masters? Even if ordinary disciples were poisoned to death, these few people couldn't possibly be poisoned to death, right? When he saw half a corpse, his whole body instantly froze. This corpse only had a head above the chest. He had seen this face before. It was Hua Sanlu, the 5th most powerful expert in the world, Hua Sanlu. Previously, he had only seen him twice from afar. At that time, he was so powerful. Now, he actually died here. Since Hua Sanlu died here, could it be that the other pavilion masters were also dead? Otherwise, why wasn't there anyone cleaning up here? Suddenly, a thought emerged in his mind. This thought terrified him. If this news were to spread, the whole world would probably be shaken. The 9 pavilions had actually been destroyed. Soon after, another thought emerged in his mind. Since the 9 pavilions had been destroyed, were the resources and secret manuals that the 9 pavilions had accumulated over the past few hundred years still around? When he thought of this, he suddenly felt a burning passion in his heart. He raised his head and looked at the 9 pavilions with a burning gaze. However, when he walked to the entrance of the village, a person beside him suddenly fell to the ground, followed by a second and a third person. This made him suddenly think of something. Was there still poison here? When he hurriedly tried to leave, he didn't run far before he fell to the ground. Yes, even though a day had passed, the sarin gas still lingered in the air here. Furthermore, it was attached to those corpses. When they checked and flipped over the corpses just now, they naturally came into contact with some. Only a few people who were guarding the mountain pass were spared. A few of them rushed in and carried the man away, but he was already foaming at the mouth and dead. When the rest of the people saw this, they hurriedly ran out of the mountain. As they left, the news of the 9 pavilions being destroyed spread. In just 2 days, countless people gathered outside the mountain. The 2 disciples who originally ran away wanted to come back in 2 days to take a look and bring away those ancient manuals. Therefore, they hesitated and did not spread the news of Qi Zixiao's arrival in Great Xia. It was just that they did not dare to go near for a while and were discovered by these people. It was only now that the others learned from the 2 disciples that Dao's Empress, Qi Zixiao, personally came to the 9 pavilions, beat up Hua Sanlu, and used an unknown poison to kill the 8 pavilion masters and all the disciples of the 9 pavilions. Everyone was shocked. Subsequently, the whole world was shocked. Countless pigeons spread this news throughout the entire Great Xia in just 2 days, and then to the rest of the world. Countless people spread this news by word of mouth. Countless people were shocked by the fact that the 9 pavilions had been destroyed, and even more people guessed Qi Zixiao's strength. After all, she could beat up Hua Sanlu, which meant that she was ranked 5th in the world now. There were even more people guessing what poison Qi Zixiao used to kill thousands of people in the 9 pavilions, including the 8 pavilion masters, in such a short period of time. No one knew that the Empress of Dao, Qi Zixiao, who was originally ranked 7th in the world, was actually an expert in using poison. Her identity, the strength that she had displayed, and the methods that she had displayed, all of them had shocked the world. At the same time, the troops at the border were getting ready, and countless experts were dispatched. No matter what, they had to make Qi Zixiao stay and not let her return to Dao. Chapter 202. When the news of the destruction of the 9 pavilions spread, countless people in Great Xia were shocked. On Earth, in Istanbul, a man and a woman were shuttling through the streets and alleys of this famous tourist city like an ordinary couple. Every day, there were countless such couples coming to this city from all over the world. As a result, it was hard to attract attention. If there was anything that caught people's attention, it would be the combination of that woman's exquisite and heroic face, as well as her ice-cold aura that kept strangers away. However, that feeling was completely gone at this moment. All her attention was on the Turkish barbecue meat in her hands, and she only occasionally glanced at the beautiful scenery around her. Renbachin was also carrying a bag with all kinds of famous local snacks in it. The 2 of them bought and ate along the way. Renbachin carried the bag along the way, and the Empress ate along the way. Every time Renbachin saw a snack, he would run over and buy it. He would try a little bit of it himself, and the rest would go into the Empress's mouth. Ever since the battle that day, the Empress's appetite had increased tremendously. She could get about 40 kilograms of meat from a 50-kilogram sheep, which was enough for a strong man to eat. The Empress could eat 2 of them leisurely, which was equivalent to her weight. No matter what food entered her stomach, it would be immediately digested and turned into essence energy, replenishing every cell in her body. During the 2 days of travel, the two of them would stop occasionally. The Empress would catch a few animals for Renbochin to roast. Then, she would sit on Qi Shui's back and eat them elegantly, but at an extremely fast speed. This slowed down their travel speed by quite a bit. After returning to Earth, the two of them took the opportunity to recuperate. Renbochin took good care of his body since he was still a little weak. On the other hand, the Empress was a man of few words and focused all her attention on eating. However, Renbochin didn't know that under the Empress's calm expression, her entire body was in pain. It was just that she was tough and endured everything without batting an eyelid. She would only speak when she was hungry. Looking at the Empress finishing a Turkish barbecue and vegetable pancake, Renbochin handed her the lion's milk, which was Turkish liquor, that he had just bought from a restaurant. This kind of anise liquor was generally around 70 degrees. After mixing it with water or ice, it would turn milky white before being drunk. The Empress raised her head and gulped down half a bottle of lion's milk that had been mixed with ice cubes. Her face was slightly red as she had already drunk 3 bottles of lion's milk along the way. Yes, she hadn't stopped eating since she arrived in the morning. The food that she ate while she was on the road in Great Xia wasn't enough for her. However, she was able to catch some animals from time to time for Renbochin to roast and eat since they were on the road. Now that she had returned to the safety of Earth, she could finally eat to her heart's content. Renbochin looked at the corner of the Empress's mouth and used his finger to rub it. The Empress paused for a moment, turned her head to look at him, lowered her head, and continued to look at the multi-layered pancake in her hand. Then, she gently bit it. The two of them walked around for a long time, but they didn't feel much about the beautiful scenery and exotic flavors here. However, they had an intuitive understanding of the snacks here. In the afternoon, the two of them went to the beach in Istanbul, near the mouth of the Black Sea. There were many people on the beach, and hot beauties in bikinis could be seen everywhere. They had beach mats under their bodies and were lying there basking in the sun. The two of them stood near the beach. Renbochin's gaze roamed around the beach. All kinds of hot beauties in bikinis were a very common sight in this world, but it made the Empress raise her eyebrows. "Do they look good?" the Empress asked coldly. "No, they can't be compared to you. There's no comparison at all. You can see that my gaze isn't on them." Renbochin turned his head to look at her and shook his head. "Everything here, the sea, the beach, and the people here are just embellishments to serve as a foil to a person." At this moment, the Empress was a little tipsy. After drinking a few bottles of lion's milk, she became even more beautiful and moving. Renbochin felt that she was like a flame, and he was the moth that couldn't help but throw himself into it. Well, in fact, he just liked to see the Empress frown, smile, and frown. That kind of liveliness that was rarely seen in Dayo also made him want to tease her a little. However, he only gave it a little every time. He wasn't a bullfighter and didn't want to be on the edge of life and death. However, he didn't come here just to make the Empress angry. He really liked the sea. Perhaps this was some kind of desire in the heart of a person who grew up in the mainland. For example, I have a house facing the sea where spring is warm and the flowers are blooming. This definitely wasn't something that people who lived by the coast could say. The sea was always the romance of the people in the mainland, especially when they were in pairs. In fact, people who lived by the coast didn't think so. This was because living by the sea was too humid, especially when it was a house with a sea view. After living for a long time, it was easy to get rheumatism and various kinds of cold diseases. The Empress was originally somewhat unhappy. After hearing what Renbochin said, she didn't say much and continued to eat her snacks with a cold face. At this moment, she was holding a cheese roll in her hand. This kind of sweet food was also her favorite. Renbochin smiled and said, "If you don't like it here, then go back. After spending half a day in the car, it was worth it to see the Empress's "I'm not happy" expression. Both of them returned to the city and stayed for a night. The next day, they took a flight to the imperial capital. After staying for a night, they chartered a car to return to Shurching early the next morning. Renbaqian threw his things on the floor and immediately collapsed on the sofa. Originally, his body hadn't recovered. Moreover, he was so tired from the long journey that he really felt that he didn't have any strength at all. In less than half an hour, the Empress looked at him with bright and piercing eyes and said, "I'm hungry." "Okay." Renbaqian leaned on the sofa and turned his head with a smile on his face. Such a simple request was something that he had to do even if he was tired. Both of them then drove out to have a meal and went to the supermarket to buy a bunch of food. For the entire afternoon, they curled up on the sofa and ate all kinds of snacks, KFC family buckets, pizza, donkey barbecue, and all kinds of cooked food while watching a movie. Occasionally, Renbaqian would snatch a piece of food from the Empress's hands to eat. Every time, the Empress would look at him, but he still didn't get tired of it. Even though there was a pile of food on the table, he still felt that the thing in the Empress's hands was more tempting to him. At night, Renbaqian watched the Empress enter her room. Only then did he return upstairs in a cheerful mood to visualize the visualization of water. Previously, when he was poisoned, every time he visualized the visualization of water, the lake water would surge like raging waves, making it impossible for him to dive into it. It wasn't until these few days that he could move his body that he could gradually dive into the lake. The lake in the visualization of water was originally a part of his body. Every time he dived into the lake, his body would change little by little. To put it simply, his kidneys were of the water attribute. It was just that the time he spent cultivating was too short. Other than his strength increasing to about 160 kilograms under the effect of the drug, he didn't discover any other changes. The next morning, Renbaqian woke up and made breakfast for the Empress. Then, he gave Qingqing a call to inform him that he was fine now. Upon hearing this news, Qingqing felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. These days, he practically squatted in the laboratory, but unfortunately, the progress was very slow. Less than 10 minutes after Renbaqian called Qingqing, he received another call from Qingqing. When he picked up the call, he heard a woman's voice coming from the other end. "Lucky boy, where are you? Can you come to the laboratory for a while?" "Not interested." Renbaqian immediately knew that it was Su Shan's voice and immediately hung up the call. Since he was fine now, he had no interest in going to the laboratory. Less than 10 seconds later, the phone started to ring again. Renbaqian immediately hung up the call. On the third time, Renbaqian frowned and picked up the call. "Boss, don't forget that you are our boss. Do you know what kind of impact the R-worm will have on this world? As long as there is a way to control it, it can cure terminal illnesses like leukemia. The whole world will benefit from it and you will also become a billionaire. Now that the progress of the experiment is very slow, please make a trip down to the laboratory." Su Shan was afraid that Renbaqian would hang up the call again. Once the call was connected, a series of words burst out of her mouth. "Money has no meaning to me anymore," Renbaqian muttered softly. Money really had no meaning to him anymore. However, if it was as effective as what Su Shan said, it would be a pity to ignore it. The Empress seemed to have brought back a few more antidotes. And if he was able to develop a special drug to cure leukemia, not only would he gain money, he would also gain social status in this world. In the future, if he wanted to obtain certain things, the necessary social status and connections were indispensable. Currently, if he wanted to obtain any important things, such as a CNC machine tool or other high-tech products, he did not have any means to do so. Even if he wanted to sell gemstones, he had to go through Qingqing. If he were to enter the circle of the rich and powerful, as long as he occasionally befriended some people, it would be of great help to him in obtaining whatever he wanted. Chapter 203. In the afternoon, Renbachien and the Empress brought the antidote to the bottom of the building where the laboratory was located and gave Qing a call. Not long after, Su Shan and Sun Qing directly ran downstairs to pick him up. It seemed like they couldn't wait any longer. Upon seeing him, they immediately pulled him over and carefully examined him from top to bottom. "That's enough from the both of you." Renbachien looked unhappy. "The last time he was poisoned, the both of you checked for a long time but to no avail. Now, you two are touching me from top to bottom like perverts. What do you two want? Which bastard touched my buttocks? F***ck, you almost touched my DD." Renbachien's face turned green. The two of them then pulled Renbachien with a surprised look. "Lucky boy, how exactly did you do it? Let's go up and talk." Renbachien looked at the Empress's face, which had the word "I'm not happy" written all over it. If this was in Deo, she might have slapped these two to death. Simply put, she was protecting her food. Renbachien had already discovered this a long time ago. However, in this world, the Empress was already very restrained. They took the elevator up. Qing wasn't there, but Qing's father was already waiting upstairs. His gaze first fell on the Empress. These few years, he had seen all kinds of people and felt that he had some foresight. Even though this woman's appearance was stunning, this wasn't the main point. The main point was that when he saw her, he would naturally start to be cautious, afraid of offending her. Ordinary people might not feel this so obviously, but for a wily old fox like him who had seen all kinds of officials, he was especially sensitive. This woman was definitely the kind of person who held the power of life and death. However, his gaze only swept across the other party and returned to Renbachien. He really didn't dare to be rash, lest he offended her for unknown reasons. This kind of person should never be offended. "It's good that you are fine. I heard from Qing a few days ago and was still worried. Now that you are fine, everything is fine," Papa Qin said with a warm smile. "Thank you, uncle." Both parties had always had a good relationship. Renbachien also had a very good impression of Papa Qin. Just like the matter of this laboratory, even though he saved Qing, if it was someone else, they wouldn't give him 60% of the shares just for a formula and a sample. It would already be considered pretty good if they could give him 40%. However, at that time, Papa Qin was just an ordinary person with a salary of a few thousand yuan. Since then, Renbachien felt that Papa Qin was someone he could work with. Therefore, he did not think too much about bringing the antidote this time. Otherwise, normal people wouldn't take out such a thing so easily. This was because the previous laboratory and agreement were only related to the black mud cream. However, he didn't care about these things. Things on this side of Earth seemed to have lost their appeal to him. Although he still didn't have money, status, or a young model, he no longer yearned for them. It was enough for him to have a certain status on Earth and obtain what he needed. "This is it convenient for you to introduce us?" Papa Qin chuckled. Although he could sense that this woman was not an ordinary person, there was no harm in getting intimate with her. Who knows, he might be able to get intimate with some big boss. For a businessman like him, this was a dream come true. "This is..." Renbachien turned his head and looked at the Empress. She was also looking at him. "My fiancé." Renbachien looked at the Empress and said. The Empress's eyes flickered for a moment before she shifted her gaze elsewhere. Cough, cough. Hearing this answer, Papa Qin almost choked to death. Very compatible. Papa Qin praised after coughing a few times. His tone was sincere. If an ordinary person heard this, they would probably think that he really thought so. Seeing that Renbachien only said this sentence, Papa Qin didn't ask any further. In any case, he and Renbochin were in the same boat now. Following which, Su Shan and Sun Qing performed a series of checkups on Renbochin. To their surprise, he had really recovered. The worms in his body had completely disappeared. How did you do it? What did you eat? Both of them looked excited. Papa Chin was also moved. In fact, he knew about this matter. Sun Qing and Su Shan directly looked for him to request for more equipment and research on the worms. Furthermore, they described the prospects of the worms. Therefore, other than expressing his concern, he also came here for this reason. This is the antidote. Renbochin took out a small antique box from the bag that he was carrying. Su Shan and Sun Qing's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. Papa Chen's gaze was also fixed on that box. At the same time, he was calculating what he should pay to make the other party hand over this box. He was very clear about this matter. Previously, the agreement between both parties was only about the black mud cream. Now that Renbochin took out this item, its value wasn't any lower than the black mud cream. After all, his identity determined his way of thinking. I only have these few left. Be careful and take good care of them. If they are used up, then there's nothing I can do. Renbochin took out another box and placed it on the table beside him. He felt that if it was just to test the composition and find the substance that was effective on the worms, 2 boxes should be enough. As for the other box in his bag, he kept it as a backup. Renbochin's straightforwardness was somewhat out of Papa Chen's expectations. Papa Chen looked at Su Shan and Sun Qing opening and inspecting the boxes as if they had obtained treasures before hurriedly sending them away. Papa Chen then said to Renbochin, "Bochin, if the research is successful, I will give you 15% of the shares." It was foreseeable that the results of this laboratory would bring in tens of billions of yuan in the future. Originally, Papa Chin only owned 40% of the shares. If he gave up 15% of the shares, not only would he be handing over hundreds of millions or even billions of yuan of assets to others, but it would also greatly reduce his control over this laboratory and the future pharmaceutical factory. Of course, the prerequisite was that there were results from the research. Even if he lost 15% of the shares, the profits wouldn't be reduced. Something that would affect the future wealth of hundreds of millions of yuan was a huge matter. Naturally, both parties had to sign a new agreement. The reason why he said this now was because there was a lady beside Renbochin that made him feel pressured. Because of his first impression, he felt that such a lady couldn't be nurtured even by a wealthy merchant family. To be able to nurture such a lady with the temperament of controlling life and death, only a family with a long history in politics or the military would be able to nurture her. Therefore, he expressed his position at the right time to prevent others from feeling that he had taken too much. There were many things that needed to be done appropriately. Forget it, uncle. I have already said that I'm not too interested in these things. Just like what you said to me in the past, when doing business, a win-win situation is the most important. I have always engraved this in my heart. Regardless of whether it is the laboratory or the pharmaceutical factory, you are the one in charge. My mind isn't on them and I don't care about earning more money. Renbochin waved his hand and said. When he was in Dao, he was backed by the entire earth. However, when he was on Earth, he was backed by another world. Especially the Empress and the entire Dao. He really didn't care about earning money. Renbochin was full of confidence and spoke in an imposing manner. His carefree manner surprised Papa Chin. In less than a year, he didn't know what this young man had experienced to actually grow to such an extent. He was even willing to hand over the wealth that was easily obtainable. After being slightly surprised, Papa Chin laughed and said, "If you call me uncle, then I will be taking advantage of you." Both parties chatted for a while and Renbochin rejected Papa Chen's suggestion again. He didn't say anything else, but he felt that this young man would be very impressive in the future. Chapter 204. Kevin, coupled with sleepiness, went to sleep first. Recently, he should have changed the time. Chapter 205. Renbachien and the Empress went shopping in the shopping mall. As long as the Empress set her eyes on a dress, Renbachien would immediately buy it. Halfway through the shopping mall, Renbachien had no choice but to return the huge pile of shopping bags to the car and continue shopping with the Empress. The Empress was in a good mood. However, when they arrived at the underwear store, Renbachien realized that the Empress was still standing outside after taking a few steps. Her footsteps were motionless, and her gaze was wandering. It was unknown where her gaze was focused. Renbachien stood inside and smiled. He casually chose 7 or 8 types of women's underwear and asked the shop assistant to find the right size and wrap them up. The underwear shop assistant also felt that it was a little funny. Women wouldn't take a step into the underwear shop no matter what, but men came in and chose to pack. Such a situation was really rare. When Renbachien came out with the paper bag, the Empress did not even look at him. The customs of Dao weren't considered conservative. Hot women wearing animal skin skirts could be seen all over the streets. After all, the weather in Dao was simply too hot. However, the Empress was an exception. Due to her identity, she rarely interacted with the outside world. She always had a dignified look on her face. As a result, she subconsciously felt a little shy when it came to undergarments. After a trip to the mall, the back seat and trunk of the car were almost full. All of them were wearing red dresses. Even though the designs were similar, there were only slight differences. Both of them found another restaurant. Renbachien watched as the Empress ate enough food for 10 people. Even the waiter had a strange look in his eyes when he added more food. Only then did both of them stop eating, or rather, the Empress put down her chopsticks. "Are you full?" Renbachien asked. "Just a little bit more." The Empress wasn't embarrassed about her appetite. The Aboriginals had always had large appetites, let alone someone like her. She had long since automatically ignored the gazes of others. She didn't care what the ants thought of her. Go to another restaurant. Have a taste of other cuisines. Renbachien looked at the plates on the table and asked with a smile. "All right." The Water Empress nodded. The two of them went to 3 restaurants in one night, Shandong cuisine, Hunan cuisine, and finally a dumpling restaurant. After that, they went back and went to deliver everything to the house before they could finally rest. The two of them curled up on the sofa and watched TV. The lights were off, and only the light and sound of the TV could be heard. The movie was the Mandarin version of Transformers. It was the same movie that Renbachien used to scare the Empress. This time, he dug it out and found that there were many scenes of modern military combat. This would allow the Empress to gain some knowledge and understand more. However, Renbachien felt a little helpless when he saw the end of the movie. He had watched this movie a long time ago and couldn't remember it clearly. After looking at it again, he realized that the soldiers inside were really weak. He reckoned that even the Empress could dismantle the transformer with her bare hands, let alone the soldiers. Renbachien turned his head and said, "The modern army is much more powerful than those in the movies, especially the various missiles, nuclear bombs, and other weapons of mass destruction, just like the sarin gas that you used before." "Got it," the Empress replied casually as she watched the battle between the robots and humans on the television with bright eyes. After watching 2 Transformers movies in a row, Renbachien switched off the television. The Empress felt a little regretful as there seemed to be more movies to come. In a mansion in Ping City, a group of people stood around a table and looked at a map. Her Majesty took this route. Hongwu drew a line on the map and said, "A straight line from Lan City." Her Majesty had already disappeared for half a month. When Hongwu first heard the news, he even tore down his house. He never expected that Her Majesty would actually go to Great Xia's 9 pavilions alone for that brat. If he had known earlier, he would have killed that brat with a single palm strike. He believed that Her Majesty wouldn't have blamed him for this. After all, when Her Majesty chose Renbaqian, her reason was merely that she didn't dislike him. Her Majesty didn't seem to have much feelings for him either. However, he didn't know what exactly happened during this period of time. He couldn't understand why Her Majesty would actually put herself in such a dangerous situation for him. Now that Her Majesty actually did such a thing for that brat, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to touch that brat anymore. At present, Hongwu's greatest wish was for Her Majesty to return safely and for that brat to die there. However, it was really hard to say what would happen if Her Majesty personally went to the 9 pavilions. Those lunatics in the 9 pavilions weren't people who were easy to deal with. Especially when Her Majesty was in an enemy nation. If she was discovered, Great Xia would definitely not give up this opportunity. What's the current situation of the winged cavalry? Hongwu asked in a deep voice. For the past half a month, he had only slept for slightly more than 2 hours every day and was a little tired. However, he still had to perk up in front of everyone. In the eyes of everyone, the general who supports the nation, Hongwu had always been like a stabilizing force. As long as he could maintain his composure, the others wouldn't panic. There's no news. There are a total of 1,500 winged cavalry warriors, and they have been in Great Xia for 10 days. Even if they were divided into 10 teams, it would still be hard to avoid being detected, someone answered from below. As long as one of the teams can find Her Majesty, we will know her location, Hongwu said in a deep voice. Every team of the winged cavalry had a carrier pigeon that was used to send messages. Right now, he was waiting for news from the winged cavalry so that he could personally escort Her Majesty back. Everyone sighed in despair. The longer Her Majesty was in Great Xia, the more dangerous it would be. It was the same for the winged cavalry. Everyone also knew that they could only wait for the winged cavalry's carrier pigeon as Hongwu had said. Sir, there's news about Her Majesty. While everyone was still pondering in the room, someone suddenly ran in quickly. Upon hearing this, everyone's face lit up. They were afraid that there wouldn't be any news, and as long as there was news, it was a good thing. What news? Speak. Hongwu's eyes lit up. Her Majesty killed Hua Sanlu in the 9 pavilions and used poison to destroy the 9 pavilions. Only 2 disciples escaped, the soldier said loudly. The room was silent at first, then everyone burst into an uproar. The information contained in this sentence was too great. Her Majesty actually killed Hua Sanlu, and this was something that no one had expected. Previously, everyone was afraid that Her Majesty would have a conflict with the 9 pavilions. After all, everyone knew Her Majesty's temperament. Coupled with a bunch of lunatics in the 9 pavilions, there was a high possibility of a conflict. Hua Sanlu was ranked 5th in the world, and Her Majesty was ranked 7th. Everyone wasn't optimistic about Her Majesty's chances of winning. The best outcome was that both sides would suffer. Then, Her Majesty would probably be hunted down by the people in the 9 pavilions. Therefore, the winged cavalry took the risk to enter Great Xia and head straight for the 9 pavilions. Along the way, they also searched for traces of Her Majesty. If Hongwu didn't know that he couldn't catch up with Her Majesty and that he had to stay in Ping City, he would have gone to the 9 pavilions first. However, no one expected Her Majesty to actually kill Hua Sanlu. This was really beyond everyone's expectations. There was another piece of news that was even more unbelievable than the previous one. Who didn't know what Her Majesty was like? She had always been straightforward. Since when did she know how to use poison? Furthermore, even though the 9 pavilions weren't considered the best in terms of using poison, they weren't too weak either. However, Her Majesty was actually able to poison everyone in the 9 pavilions to death. According to this piece of news, only 2 disciples escaped, and the 8 pavilion masters were also dead. What exactly was going on? This time, Her Majesty only left with Imperial Deputy Prefect Rinpochen. Could it be that Rinpochen was an expert in using poison? Furthermore, he was an expert who could destroy the 9 pavilions with poison. This thought emerged in everyone's mind. Other than this, there was no other explanation. Is there any other news? Where is Her Majesty now? Hongwu suppressed the shock in his heart and asked in a deep voice. It is said that Her Majesty is seriously injured and her current whereabouts are unknown. Her Majesty reached the 9 pavilions 4 days ago and left on the same day, that soldier continued. Bang! The table under Hongwu's palm instantly turned into sawdust. At this moment, Qi Shui, which was carrying the Empress and Rinpochen on its back, suddenly stopped running. It lowered its body and looked at the 2 ladies in front of it vigilantly. Both of them were dressed like Taoist nuns. One of them wore a headband on her forehead and a pendant hung between her eyebrows. She had an ethereal temperament and was exceptionally beautiful. She didn't look like a woman of this world and her eyes were as clear and tranquil as a lake. Chapter 206. Hey, senior sister, wait for me. You can get others to look for these 7 leaves, but you have to come out and look for them yourself. A 15 or 16-year-old girl in a Taoist robe was bouncing around the mountains like a cheerful deer. Another Taoist nun was carrying a cloth bag. From time to time, she would enter the forest and stop in front of a shrub. She would gently pick a fingernail-sized nut and put it in the cloth bag. This fruit was called 7 leaves. After the outer shell was peeled off, the kernel would be revealed. It was high in oil and sweet in the mouth. It was a favorite snack of many people in Great Xia and could even be used to extract oil. It was very expensive for ordinary people, who couldn't bear to eat it after picking it in the mountains and sold it in the city. However, this thing was nothing to the Taoist nun. As long as she opened her mouth, countless people would come to her door and she wouldn't be able to eat it in her lifetime. Therefore, she didn't understand why senior sister would go up the mountain to pick the 7 leaves every year at this time. Moreover, she had to go so far. It was those guys who had picked all the 7 leaves near the Taoist temple. Senior sister and she had to run for a long time to find this place. Wasn't it all about eating? What was the difference? Wouldn't it be more fragrant if she picked it herself? You will know in the future. The otherworldly woman smiled faintly. Her smile was plain and modest. She was Li Yuanzhu, the 3rd most powerful expert in the world. If Hua Sanlu was said to be the most hated person among the experts, she was the most admired person in Great Xia. Ever since she became famous, she had never killed a single person, nor had her hands been stained with blood. She had always been plain and modest, making people feel close to her. Even a woodcutter or an old woman from a farmer's family wouldn't feel uncomfortable when they saw her. At most, they would say that this girl was really beautiful. This was a woman who was like a fairy in everyone's heart. The other 15 or 16-year-old girl was called Ning Qing. She was said to be Li Yuanzhu's junior sister, but in fact, Li Yuanzhu's master had died long ago. Ning Qing was just taking in a disciple on behalf of her master. At this moment, she said that she was going to accompany Li Yuanzhu to pick the 7 leaves, but she jumped around the moment she'd entered the forest. She liked everything she saw, be it a red leaf or a beautiful stone. Occasionally, she would yell and chase after a small beast, but she didn't pick a single 7 leaves. While Li Yuanzhu plucked the 7 leaves, Ning Qing played for the whole afternoon before returning to Li Yuanzhu's side. She pretended to help pluck a few leaves, but her eyes were attracted by a few bugs. Li Yuanzhu smiled helplessly when she saw her expression. She was always like this and couldn't stop. Oh right, senior sister, that Qi Zixiao is also very powerful. I heard that she killed Hua Sanlu. Hua Sanlu was ranked 5th in the world. His ranking was even higher than hers, but he was actually killed by her. Ning Qing was jumping up and down again. Suddenly, she recalled something she heard and turned her head to say, "Of course." Li Yuanzhu pursed her lips and smiled. I didn't expect Qi Zixiao to come to the Great Xia dynasty. She could have been an emperor, but she went to fight with Hua Sanlu. Ning Qing asked curiously. Li Yuanzhu recalled the information she had heard and found it very interesting and unexpected, but she didn't say it out loud. She never liked to talk about such gossip. It would be great if I could meet her. I heard that she is the most beautiful woman in the world. I really want to see what she looks like, but she is definitely not as beautiful as senior sister, Ning Qing mumbled again. Her senior sister had a mild temperament and didn't care about anything. However, she paid a lot of attention to the other woman in the top 10 experts in the world. After all, there was a similar age gap between them and they were the only 2 women in the top 10 experts. It was inevitable that they would often be compared to each other. Ning Qing naturally didn't like it and subconsciously felt hostility toward the Empress. The 2 of them walked, picked, and played along the way. After going over another mountain, Li Yuanzhu straightened her body and turned her head to look. She felt a very strong aura rapidly approaching them. Her perception was considered very strong, but it couldn't cover a large range. She only sensed it when the other party was within a kilometer. Senior sister, what's wrong? Ning Qing asked curiously. Someone is coming. It's an expert, but his aura is weak. He should be injured, Li Yuanzhu said without much expression. No matter who it was, she wouldn't be too concerned. It was just that Ning Qing was beside her, and it wouldn't be good if she didn't pay attention to the other party and Ning Qing got into a conflict. An expert. Senior sister, he must be very powerful if you say he's an expert. He's even injured. Don't tell me it's Qi Zixiao. Ning Qing laughed as she spoke. Although she wanted to see that famous woman, the world was so big. It would be too much of a coincidence if they could meet here. No matter how she thought about it, it was impossible. Li Yuanzhu remained silent. Soon, the 2 of them saw a Qilin beast carrying 2 people on its back. It suddenly stopped and stared at them cautiously. Li Yuanzhu raised her eyes and met the cold gaze of the person on the Qilin's back. She was right. How could it be such a coincidence? Li Yuanzhu was surprised. Ning Qing was a little curious when she saw the Qilin beast. Then, she looked at the Qilin and the man and woman on its back, especially the woman in red who was full of heroic spirit. Suddenly, a person that she had just mentioned flashed in her mind. She opened her mouth wide in surprise. Was she going to become an immortal? How could she be so accurate? Qi Zixiao. Li Yuanzhu whispered. Although she had never met him, she could recognize him at a glance. After all, he was powerful, dressed in red, and riding a Qilin. It would be strange if she didn't know who he was. Li Yuanzhu. The Empress exuded a cold aura. She didn't expect to meet this famous woman here, and she couldn't help but feel that the other party was here to stop her. However, how could she retreat when she saw this woman who was as famous as herself, even if she was only left with 30% of her strength? She floated down from the Qilin and landed in front of him. Her body was as straight as a spear as she looked at the other party. Renbaqian looked at her posture and wondered what was going on. Did she meet an expert? Who was Li Yuanzhu? Since the Empress could recognize her at a glance, she couldn't be weak. He thought about it again and seemed to have heard this name before. He quickly tried to recall when he had heard it before. At this moment, Li Yuanzhu smiled and said in a calm and amiable tone, I don't have any ill intentions. It's just a coincidence. This is fate between you and I. I have heard of you for a long time. Why don't we sit for a while? What do you mean? The Empress asked coldly. I just want to get to know you when I see you. I naturally won't stop you if you want to leave, Li Yuanzhu said with a smile. Her voice was neither fast nor slow, and it made people feel like they were bathing in the spring breeze. Renbaqian looked at the scene from behind and was sure that she was definitely an expert. She might even be one of the top 10 experts. Her attitude couldn't be faked. She treated him as an equal, and the Empress seemed to be afraid of her. At the thought of this, he suddenly remembered who she was. Li Yuanzhu, the third most powerful expert in the world. Wasn't she the one? He had heard someone mention her before, but he didn't take it to heart and didn't think about it for a while. Renbaqian was shocked when he realized the other party's identity. Even at her peak, the Empress might not be able to defeat her, let alone now that she only had 30% of her strength. Fortunately, she didn't show any ill intentions. However, the Empress was still standing there like a telephone pole. After all, she wasn't the type to be at loggerheads with you 1 minute and sit down to drink and chat merrily the next. However, she couldn't possibly keep standing like this, right? In any case, the other party had shown goodwill. It was better not to show hostility at this time and wait until she recovered. She immediately shouted, "We have meat, do you have wine?" There was silence. Li Yuanzhu didn't expect that the man she didn't pay much attention to would speak at this time and even say such a thing. A gentle smile appeared on her delicate face. "We don't have wine, but we have qi. I picked it myself and will treat you to a meal." After a while, the four of them sat together. The Empress and Li Yuanzhu looked at each other and didn't speak. One was cold, while the other was gentle. They were two completely different people. However, when the two of them sat together, the wilderness made people feel like they were in a fairyland. Ning Qing looked at the Empress curiously and then at Renbaqian. She thought to herself, so Qi Zixiao is like this. She is indeed very beautiful. So this is the gigolo that she found. I really can't see what's so special about him. Renbaqian looked at the two of them looking at each other without speaking and felt a little bored. However, he didn't expect the third most powerful expert in the world to be so gentle. He always thought that the top 10 experts in the world were as domineering as the Empress. After all, an expert had to have the demeanor of an expert. The other girl, who was about 15 or 16 years old, looked at the Empress and then at him. She looked like she was looking at a rare animal, which made him feel a little awkward. Senior sister is more beautiful, Ning Qing suddenly said after looking at her for a long time, breaking the silence in the field. Other than her, no one else would have seen these two peerless experts say such words when they were together. Li Yuanzhu looked apologetic, stretched out her lily-white hand, and gently patted Ning Qing's head twice, blaming her for talking nonsense. Renbaqian felt that the Empress's body and face became even colder. After thinking about it, he felt that the Empress and Li Yuanzhu were currently in a state of defeating you with their eyes. He had an obligation to help the Empress regain her dignity. However, it was hard to tell who was better in terms of appearance as they were both different. In terms of martial arts, Li Yuanzhu was the third most powerful expert in the world, and the Empress didn't seem to have anything to be proud of. Renbaqian's eyes lit up as he looked at her. Zixiao has big breasts. Renbaqian killed her with a single blow. Li Yuanzhu was as beautiful as a fairy and had an otherworldly aura that made her seem like a fairy who had fallen into the mortal world by mistake. However, she had a flat chest, at least in his eyes. Not only her, but the person beside her was also like this. As a result, Renbaqian's words were extremely lethal. Ning Qing looked at the Empress's chest, looked at her senior, and then lowered her head to look at herself. Immediately, her face turned ugly. Even a lady like Li Yuanzhu had her otherworldly aura shattered by this sentence. She subconsciously glanced at the Empress, and her ears turned slightly red. Chapter 207. Renbachien had stabbed both of them in the heart. It was a stab in the heart. Even Li Yuanzhu's calm demeanor was broken. She was embarrassed and annoyed, let alone Ningqing. Her mouth was so red that a soy sauce bottle could be hung on it. She glared at him with extreme hatred and wished she could bite off a piece of meat. Renbachien then acted as if nothing had happened. He took out a packet of spiced beef and said, "Do you want to try it? It's a specialty from my place and tastes pretty good." Li Yuanzhu didn't know what to do with such a person. She had a hard time when she was young. When she grew up, everyone treated her with respect. For 10 years, no one had treated her like this, giving her a red date after giving her a slap. Did he think she was a child? However, she really couldn't lose her temper. It seemed that she hadn't been angry for a long time. Although Renbachien's words broke her calmness, it only made her feel a little embarrassed. At the same time, she found it a little funny. This person was really bold. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was extremely daring. He actually dared to say such words in front of Qi Zixiao. Although Qi Zixiao glared at him with a murderous look, she actually didn't lose her temper. This made her a little curious. After all, she had heard a lot about Qi Zixiao's temperament. This person was indeed as weak as the rumors said. His appearance could only be considered delicate and was far from handsome. Not only was Qi Zixiao willing to take risks for him, but she also tolerated him at this time. It was really strange. Li Yuanzhu really wanted to know why Qi Zixiao treated him like this. However, she was only curious. She had always been calm and impulsive, and she rarely paid too much attention to the outside world. In fact, she would probably forget about this matter after a few days, so naturally, she wouldn't ask. At this moment, the atmosphere was broken. She said, "I have long wanted to meet the famous Empress of Dayo, but Lan City is too far away. I didn't expect to have such an opportunity today. So what if I see her?" The Empress said coldly. She didn't have any thoughts about Li Yuanzhu. She didn't even hate her after seeing her, but she was still somewhat unconvinced. She was ranked 7th, and now she was ranked 5th. The other party was ranked 3rd. It was a pity that she only had 30% of her strength left. Otherwise, she would have given it a try. Your reputation is well deserved. Li Yuanzhu smiled gently. Humph. The Empress snorted. Ningqing looked at Li Yuanzhu and then at the Empress, feeling displeased. Senior sister is such a good person, why do you keep snorting? Not to mention that you're seriously injured right now, even if you were in perfect condition, you wouldn't be able to defeat senior sister. Senior sister is number 3 in the world, Ningqing said proudly as she raised her head. Li Yuanzhu is ranked 3rd in the world, and you're only ranked 7th. What's there to be arrogant about? Besides, you're seriously injured. It was a very simple and childish thought. After all, he was only 15 or 16 years old and had grown up in a Taoist temple. He did not know much about the ways of the world and his personality was jumpy. Everyone in the monastery doted on her, and she did not feel that there was anything wrong with it. However, these words caused the Empress to become even colder. Her eyes were filled with battle intent. If not for her severe injuries, she would have started fighting immediately. Sorry, she has a childish temperament, Li Yuanzhu apologized with a sincere look in her eyes. Then, he turned to look at Ningqing. Don't talk nonsense again, or I won't bring you out next time. However, his tone was not stern at all. Renbachien pondered. He was still a child. His next sentence should be, don't ever let her off, right? What would they do when they grew up? What was the point of having the police? However, what she said was the truth. At most, he would be reprimanded for talking nonsense and making an unintentional mistake. However, this would be even more hurtful. Zixiao has big breasts, Ren Baqin said with certainty. Ren Baqin felt that he was Feng Qingyang now. His 9 swords beyond the swords were specialized in breaking all kinds of techniques. Nothing could cover up his mediocrity. Breasts. Things. However, he also took advantage of Li Yuanzhu's good temper. She was obviously angry, but she still had to maintain her poise. Although such a person was number 3 in the world, he was easy to bully. If it was someone else, let alone number 3, even if he was number 10 in the world, Ren Baqin might not dare to poke at their wounds. Ning Qing's face turned green. She had never hated someone so much in her life. If she could, she would bite him to death. The smile on Li Yuanzhu's face could no longer be maintained. It was not easy to get over the matter just now, but Ren Baqin poked both of their chests again. For the first time, she felt that she hated this person a little. The Empress was about to fly into a rage out of humiliation. Her ears were completely red, and she wanted to slap the guy beside her to death. However, when she saw the stiff smile on Li Yuanzhu's face, she immediately withdrew her coldness and smiled instead. When she withdrew her coldness and smiled like a flower, it was exceptionally captivating. This smile disappeared in a flash. After all, winning in this aspect wasn't something to be proud of. In her heart, strength was always the first priority. You have seen enough. I'm leaving, the Empress said. She lifted Ren Baqin's collar and landed on Qi Shui's back in a few flashes. She still had the attitude of a victor. The two of them stopped and sat with each other for a while. Ren Baqin ruthlessly stabbed both of them in the heart. When they passed by, Qi Zixiao raised her hand and threw a bottle at them. Li Yuanzhu subconsciously caught it. Only when the Kirin was nowhere to be seen did Ning Qing scream hysterically. That slut! How could Qi Zixiao be so blind as to fall for him? Senior, why didn't you slap him to death? He actually dared to compare you with Qi Zixiao. Li Yuanzhu shook her head slightly and was speechless. That guy was simply a jerk. She looked at the bottle in her hand. It was like white jade, and the fragrance of wine wafted out after unscrewing it. Was he treating her to a drink? Li Yuanzhu smiled at the thought of this. Senior, why are you still smiling? I'm so pissed, Ning Qing said resentfully. After the two of them were far away, Ren Baqin smiled and said, Zixiao, I have avenged you. It would have been better if he hadn't mentioned this. Now that he mentioned it, the Empress was furious. Since when did she rely on this to suppress others? Also, what were his eyes looking at? She had really embarrassed herself today. Moreover, it was in front of Li Yuanzhu. Although she had already realized that this world didn't seem to care much about this, and there were always models wearing underwear on TV and bikinis on the beach, she still found it hard to accept. She really wanted to slap Ren Baqin, but in the end, she couldn't do it. After holding back her anger for a long time and thinking about Li Yuanzhu's expression just now, she felt an inexplicable sense of pleasure and satisfaction. The two of them traveled for another day. When they crossed a mountain, they heard a series of battle cries. Both of them rode on Qi Shui and looked down from the mountain ridge. All they could see was chaos below. One of them was the Great Xia army with a few thousand soldiers. The other side was leaping and launching a surprise attack towards the army. More than 100 figures charged towards the front of the army formation. The tens of people at the front braved the rain of arrows and leaped into the army formation. However, tens of figures also leaped out from the army formation and blocked them so that they wouldn't be disrupted by the attack. At this moment, the people at the back of the group leaped up and landed in the formation, setting off a rain of blood. This is the winged cavalry. The Empress took a closer look and recognized the identity of these people. After all, she couldn't be more familiar with the equipment of the winged cavalry. However, why were they here and even colliding with the Great Xia army? At this moment, the formation of the Great Xia army suddenly changed. Other than the soldiers that were entangled, the others formed a circle under the command of the winged cavalry and surrounded the group of more than 100 people and their opponents. Chapter 208. Die. One of the burly men laughed maniacally. The long saber in his hand pierced through the air and slashed at his opponent. Then, he brought the other saber in front of him. These two fellows cooperated well. Two advanced man-will experts were actually able to block a few of his moves, but that was as far as they could go. With a turn of his body, the long saber changed direction, and the head of the other opponent flew into the sky. Then, he shouted loudly and was about to split the opponent that he had just slashed into two when he was suddenly stopped by several spears from the side. The burly man had a look of contempt on his face. With a casual swing of his saber, the hands that were holding the spears immediately lost control, and the spears flew into the sky. However, those people didn't stop and immediately moved away. The people behind them continued to stab with their spears. This was the centipede formation used by Great Xia during the battle with the Aboriginals. The advantage of the Aboriginal warriors was too great. Even if the number of Great Xia soldiers was 10 times that of the Aboriginals, it would be difficult to achieve victory on the battlefield without relying on this battle formation. Needless to say, they were facing the elites of the Aboriginals, the winged cavalry. Although there were only slightly more than 100 of them, all of them were at the earth-will level. Even 5,000 elite soldiers would find it difficult to resist them. The difference in strength was too great. Therefore, after the Great Xia generals arranged for dozens of people to block the first batch of Aboriginal warriors, they immediately launched the centipede formation and eliminated these 100 people. This kind of situation occurred in many places on the battlefield. After the winged cavalry warriors killed and repelled their opponents, they discovered that they had to face opponents that moved quickly and held spears that were like centipedes with hundreds of legs. A bunch of bastards. One of the winged cavalry warriors cut off all the spears around him like a spinning top. The long saber in his hand turned into a white line and cut off 5 or 6 heads. Suddenly, a spear pierced toward his waist at an extremely fast speed. The winged cavalry warrior grabbed the spear with one hand, making it difficult for his opponent to advance. Then, he flicked the spear upward, and his opponent quickly let go of his hands. This was the result of many years of combat experience. These people were all Great Xia captains who were at the beginner level of the man-wheel. They had fought with the Aboriginals more than once and were able to survive. Regardless of strength or reaction, they were much stronger than the rest. However, in the next second, he saw a flash of saber light in front of him in horror. His entire body was directly sent flying from his chest. If it was an ordinary Aboriginal warrior facing the centipede formation, it was very likely that he would be obstructed by the surrounding spear formations. However, he wasn't facing an ordinary Aboriginal warrior, but the elite winged cavalry. One of the soldiers chopped off a few more heads with a backhand. When his gaze swept across the surroundings, his body suddenly paused. A long spear had directly left a bloody mark under his armpit. The soldier chopped off the heads of the 2 people in front of him with a backhand. His face was filled with joy as he shouted, "Your Majesty." Upon hearing this sound, all the Aboriginal warriors revealed a look of joy and looked in the direction of the sound. Many of them didn't manage to dodge in time and ended up with a few wounds on their bodies. However, many people saw a red figure rushing towards them from afar. Who else could it be but His Majesty? "Your Majesty! We've found Her Majesty!" Everyone cheered excitedly, not forgetting to slash their opponents to death. A middle-aged general at the back of the Great Xia battle formation was originally frowning as he looked at the battlefield. Based on the current situation, even if these 5,000 elite soldiers could eliminate more than 100 winged cavalry warriors, they would at least lose 70% of their men. This was an optimistic estimate, and the possibility of both sides suffering losses was very high. It was a pity that there wasn't a crossbow battalion. If there was, this wouldn't have happened. One had to know that these were all battle-hardened elite soldiers. Although the Merciful didn't command soldiers, his heart was bleeding. The only consolation was that these were, after all, the most elite winged cavalry warriors of Deo. At least 1/10 of them were here, and even if these 5,000 elite soldiers were to be sacrificed, it wouldn't be considered a loss. At this moment, he heard the yells of the winged cavalry warriors in the battle formation. His facial expression changed drastically. Sitting on the back of his horse, he saw a red figure rushing in his direction. "Stop her," the general shouted, but he was distressed. Why did Qi Zixiao appear at this time? He had already invested all his troops to surround these winged cavalry warriors. Together with Qi Zixiao, there was simply no way to stop them. He could only hope that Qi Zixiao was seriously injured as rumored. However, he didn't have any expectations as he looked at the figure that was rushing over from afar. Even if she was seriously injured, they wouldn't be able to stop her. Furthermore, looking at her current speed, she didn't look like she was injured at all. Half of the hundreds of winged cavalry warriors that surrounded him immediately turned their horses and rushed toward the red figure. The Empress's face was ice cold. Facing the 50 to 60 winged cavalry warriors, she leaped into the air. Just like how she stepped on human skulls on Earth, it didn't matter if they dodged or brandished their sabers. To the Empress, there was practically no difference. In a single move, more than a dozen of the winged cavalry warriors fell from their horses. Before that happened, they were already dead. These 50 to 60 winged cavalry warriors couldn't even stop her for half a step. When the remaining people turned their horses around, they could only see the back of the Empress charging in their direction. "Shoot!" The middle-aged general looked at the scene in front of him and trembled slightly. He forcefully controlled his voice and gave the order. He smiled bitterly. His 5,000 elite soldiers were entangled with the winged cavalry and couldn't move at all. Regardless of whether he retreated or not, he would still die. It's over, it's all over. At this moment, the only hope in his heart was that a few more people could escape and kill a few more winged cavalry warriors. The remaining people had already drawn their bows and nocked their arrows. Upon hearing the order, they immediately released their bows. 50 to 60 arrows pierced through the air and flew straight toward the lady in red. The Empress stretched out her hand and grabbed. 6 or 7 arrows appeared in her hand. As for the rest, she brushed them aside. With a flip of her hand, the 6 or 7 arrows flew back. 3 of them directly missed, 2 of them penetrated the horse's buttocks, and 1 of them was lucky enough to hit one of the winged cavalry warriors. Seeing this, the Empress's face turned even colder. After brushing aside the second round of arrows, she immediately appeared on a horse and smashed that man's head with one hand. Taking advantage of the situation, she pounced toward the general who was surrounded in the middle. Immediately, 3 figures on their horses soared into the sky. These 3 people actually had the strength of an earth will expert. However, they were smashed to the ground one after another. The Empress smashed that general's head with one palm. Carrying the corpse, she leaped out of the crowd and shouted, "The great Xia general is dead. Kill!" Her cold voice spread throughout the battlefield. "Kill!" The winged cavalry warriors laughed heartily and shouted. At this moment, the fatigue from the past few days couldn't be found on their bodies. It was as if they had been injected with chicken blood. "Avenge the general!" This weak voice was immediately drowned out. However, that general's personal guard still had the determination to die and rushed toward the Empress with a sorrowful look on his face. After knowing that their general was dead, the morale of the great Xia soldiers plummeted. Coupled with the fact that there was no one to command them, they collapsed in no time and began to flee in all directions. Your Majesty! More than 10 winged cavalry warriors rushed to the Empress's side. Their faces were full of reverence. At this moment, the ground around her was already filled with corpses. Kill them and come back in the time it takes to burn an incense stick, the Empress said coldly. Yes. Other than a captain who remained by the Empress's side, the rest of the people broke into a run and chased after the great Xia soldiers who had scattered. Renbaqian watched the bloody massacre of this era from the ridge and then saw the Empress charge alone. In particular, those shouts of "kill" made his blood boil. However, it was only blood boil. Chapter 209. By the time he reached the foot of the mountain, the winged cavalry warriors had already returned. The ground was full of severed limbs. There were no injured people, only scattered limbs. The air was filled with the smell of blood, which made Renbaqian's nose uncomfortable. However, he resisted the urge to cover his nose. Even though he wasn't used to it, it would be too pretentious of him to cover his nose when these winged cavalry warriors entered deep into Great Xia to search for the Empress and engaged in a fierce battle. The Empress had been standing there all along. The lieutenant beside her was actually someone she knew. It was Ting Ji from the previous time. However, when he saw Renbaqian, he didn't give him any face. After all, the Empress had put herself in danger because of him. It was already good enough that the others didn't attack him the moment they met. He couldn't even dream of being nice to them. Renbaqian could think of this, so he didn't mind. He just felt a little helpless. Previously, he had always been with the Empress and Renbaqian, so he didn't pay much attention to this matter. Now that he had encountered it, there was nothing he could do. Not long after Renbaqian left the mountain, many winged cavalry warriors who had chased after the stragglers returned one after another. Their bodies were covered in blood. Not only them, but the Empress's body was also stained with a lot of blood. Each of them had a simple smile on their faces, but their bodies reeked of blood, making people feel the cruelty of this world. Your Majesty! Everyone knelt on one knee in front of the Empress. Get up, the Empress said. Her voice was dignified, but it wasn't cold. No matter who saw this kind of subordinate, they would not have a cold face anymore. Why are you guys here? The Empress asked. The winged cavalry swears to follow Her Majesty to the death. Everyone shouted in unison. The Empress's expression softened a little. She looked at everyone's faces and then became stern again. Where are the others? Your Majesty, we will split into 10 teams to search for Your Majesty. The others will take other routes. There should be 2 teams that are closer to here. Ting Ji raised his head and said. Everyone, get up, the Empress said again. As for these people, she could only say that they were burdens, but she did not say it out loud. After all, there was a huge disparity between the winged cavalry's mount and Qishui's speed. Moreover, the more people there were, the bigger the target. Yes. Everyone stood up. How are the casualties? The Empress asked again. Ting Ji turned around and looked at everyone. Line up. Over 100 people stood loosely in 4 rows. Ting Ji carefully looked from the front to the back. Where are the other 2 people? Look for it. Everyone knew that if he didn't return now, he couldn't have chased after the scattered soldiers. He must be among the corpses on the ground. There were at least 600 to 700 corpses on the ground. In the short period of battle just now, 600 to 700 elite soldiers of Great Xia were lying here. In addition to the scattered soldiers who were killed, the total number of casualties was more than 1,500. However, there were only deaths and no injuries. On the other hand, 2 winged cavalry warriors had died in battle. If the Empress hadn't killed the commander, the winged cavalry would have suffered even more casualties as time passed. After a while, the Empress looked at the two corpses that were being carried over and said, "Take them away first and give them an elaborate burial when we return." Everyone knew that it was impossible to bring the corpses back as they would stink halfway. However, they had to bring the two corpses to a safe place first. They would bring the heads back, but the corpses would be buried in the mountains without leaving a tombstone. When Aboriginal warriors died outside, this was how they usually dealt with it. The heroic spirit and head would be brought back to the 60,000 mountains to be buried. The heroic spirit would protect the Aboriginals forever. It was the same when they tried to kill the seventh prince. Inform the other two troops to wait for them at a place that is 1 day's journey away. The rest of the troops will return to Deo, the Empress said. Yes, Your Majesty. Should we inform General Hongwu? Ting Ji asked. Make the arrangements. The Empress waved her hand. Ting Ji immediately called for someone to contact the other troops. The rest of the troops also returned to look for their mounts. Many of them took a glance at Rinpochean before they left. They wanted to see what kind of scoundrel made the Empress take such a risk for him. At this moment, Rinpochean's mood was similar to Rene's in Saving Soldier Rene. His mood was somewhat complicated. The winged cavalry warriors had their own method of communication. It was an animal that was the size of a hummingbird. They were called Inyao. There were two of them, and they would live and die together. When one of them was released, it would automatically return to the other side. It was very magical. No one knew how they found each other. In just a few moments, 5 or 6 pitch-black shifting birds flew out from the distance, quickly flying in different directions. Every troop had a few Inyao birds in their hands. The other troops would then communicate with each other. After a while, many of the winged cavalry warriors returned with those giant goats. The 2 dead soldiers were tied to the backs of their mounts. When they saw the great Xia army just now, they immediately got down from their mounts and let them hide further away. These goats were also very smart. They didn't run too far away and waited by the side to graze. The so-called winged cavalry looked like cavalry, but in fact, they were a group of infantrymen who rode on their mounts. After all, the restrictions on their mounts were too great, and they couldn't unleash their full strength. Let's go back, the Empress said to everyone. Her voice spread across the entire battlefield. Her figure flashed and landed behind Rinpochean. She then sat sideways on top of him. Let's go. Many of the winged cavalry let out a strange cry that sounded very primitive and barbaric. One after another, they followed behind Chishui. The hundreds of winged cavalry almost gave off the grandeur of tens of thousands of galloping horses. The earth trembled along with them. The Aboriginals' weight couldn't go unnoticed. At this moment, a caravan was advancing on the plains. More than 10 carriages were filled with goods. There were also dozens of odd job workers and martial artists leading the caravan. Among them, a dignified-looking martial artist in his 40s seemed to have sensed something. He instructed the person beside him, Luer, listen to see if there's any movement. Following his command, a young man quickly dismounted from his horse and pressed his ear to the ground. Following which, he sprinted a few steps and leaped onto the horse's back. Boss, there's cavalry coming in our direction. The middle-aged man nodded. This was the hinterland of Great Xia, and cavalry could be seen occasionally. There weren't any bandits nearby, so there was no need to worry. However, for safety's sake, he still leaned against a carriage and knocked on it. Manager, there's cavalry coming in our direction. A man with a round face, who looked like a rich man, came out of the carriage and shouted, "Stop first." Manager, do you want to set up a formation first? Just in case, the middle-aged man asked again. The manager waved his hand and said, "There's no need. There won't be any bandits here. Everyone, just wait here for a while." He had traveled this route every year, and he had never heard of any bandits appearing here. Yu City was 25 kilometers away. Not to mention the experts in the government and army, there was also the Qingyang sect on the mountain outside the city. There were 3 earth will experts in the sect, and the bandits would be courting death if they appeared here. As soon as the convoy stopped, everyone felt the ground shake and dust rise in the distance. There's quite a number of them. The middle-aged man subconsciously thought that it was impossible to cause such a tremor if there were only a few of them. There had to be at least 500 of them. Maybe they're from the army. Didn't they say that Qi Zixiao was in Dayo recently? I'm afraid they're looking for her. The manager narrowed his eyes and guessed. So what if they find her? The middle-aged man shook his head slightly. At most, there were earth will experts in the army, and they weren't on the same level as spirit will experts. No matter how many of them there were, they wouldn't be able to stop her. Although he was only an advanced man will expert, he had heard a lot about the strength of spirit will experts due to his family background. The man sat on the horse and looked in that direction. After a while, he could see some shadows in front of him. Following which, his expression changed drastically. At the front was an unknown monster that was carrying a person. Behind it wasn't a horse at all, but a goat. It was the kind of giant goat that was most commonly seen in Dayo. Only the Aboriginals loved to ride this kind of mount. When he realized this, his expression changed drastically, and he shouted, "It's not the Great Xia cavalry, it's the Dayo people. Why are the Dayo people here? Don't care about the goods, run." The manager's expression also changed after hearing his words. How is this possible? Why are the Dayo people here? No, we can't lose the goods. Ordinary Aboriginal soldiers are at the man-will level. How can those who can come here be ordinary soldiers? They can't stop them at all. Why should we care about the goods? They can't take them away. The middle-aged man lifted him up as he shouted. He simply didn't care about anything else, turned his horse around, and galloped in the direction of Yuqing. The rest of the people's expressions changed drastically as they fled in all directions. As for the goods, they simply couldn't care less. Just like what the man said, the Aboriginals couldn't take the goods away. At this moment, escaping was the most important thing. The odd-job workers hated their parents for not giving them 2 more legs. The middle-aged man spurred his horse forward and looked back from time to time. After a while, he saw that the Dayo people didn't have any intention of chasing after them and directly headed for Mount Yuyang. Only then did he heave a sigh of relief. After all the Aboriginals had entered Mount Yuyang, he then instructed, "Go and inform the officials of Yuqing." After waiting for a long time, he spurred his horse back. Renbachchen sat on the back of Qi Shui and saw these people fleeing in all directions from afar. However, even if they didn't run, he couldn't be bothered with them. After all, so many defeated soldiers had fled just now, and those who should have been informed had already been informed. Everyone entered Mount Yuyang and ran all the way to the depths. Regardless of whether it was Qi Shui or those giant mountain goats, they were very good at running and jumping in the forest. The complex terrain of the forest didn't hinder them at all, and it was difficult for the Great Xia army to catch up. Everyone rested for a while every 2 hours. At night, they spent the night in the depths of Mount Yuyang. The Empress and Renbachchen sat next to a bonfire. Renbachchen was roasting meat for the Empress while the rest stayed far away. However, they could still smell the aroma coming from the bonfire. It was obviously the same thing, but they always felt that the aroma coming from the bonfire was exceptionally alluring. At daybreak the next day, everyone got up and set off again. Half a day later, they stopped at a mountain ridge. This was the place where Ting Ji and the other 2 teams had agreed to meet. Qingyang's sect leader, Lu Kanjun, sent someone to see you. A burly man hurriedly entered the room and said, "I won't meet him. Even if I am possessed by the devil and am seriously injured, the old man in the room replied without even lifting his eyelids. If he didn't know about this news, he might as well meet him. Since he already knew about it, he might as well close the door and refuse to meet him. Sect leader. Why don't we meet him? In any case, we should at least listen to what he has to say. That burly man had a strange look on his face. How could the Qingyang sect's martial arts be possessed by the devil? Furthermore, the relationship between the Qingyang sect and the officials had always been pretty good. There was no need to be so extreme, right? Yesterday, a group of aboriginals entered Mount Yuyang. The old man saw that he was puzzled and casually told him about it. So what? The burly man didn't understand what was going on. Even though the aboriginals weren't weak, it shouldn't be to the extent of being scared to this extent just by hearing the name. Seeing that he was stupid, the old man shook his head angrily. A group of more than 100 people, and all of them are Dao's winged cavalry. Even the weakest among them is at the earth will level like you and me. Among them, Qi Zixiao is also among them. Lu Kanjun is courting death by dragging our Qingyang sect into this. If you want to take a look, you can go ahead. Chapter 210. Renbaqian, the Empress, and more than 100 winged cavalry warriors waited on the mountain ridge from noon until late at night. It was not until the next morning that one group arrived, but there was still no sign of the other group. The group of winged cavalry didn't encounter any trouble along the way, but they encountered a group of about 1,000 cavalry warriors on their way here. They were immediately killed, and more than half of them escaped. Renbaqian suspected that the group of winged cavalry warriors had encountered some trouble. For example, they encountered a large number of elite Great Xia soldiers like the group that he and the Empress had encountered. He was afraid that it would be somewhat dangerous. If they continued to wait, the Great Xia army might have already received the news and set up camp outside. However, he didn't bring it up. He was the one who had the least right to speak here. The Empress was here for him, and these winged cavalry warriors were here to look for the Empress. Could he suggest not to wait anymore? Unless he had no other choice, Renbaqian knew that he would absolutely not say it. Let's continue to wait. At worst, we can go back and get some nightshade and pralidoxime. Those things are much easier to get than sarin gas, Renbaqian thought to himself. Back then, the Empress brought back 2 packs of sarin gas. One was used in the 9 pavilions, and the other was still hanging on Qi Shui's back. Originally, Renbaqian wanted to bring it back to Dao for safekeeping. In the future, when the war started, he would throw it at the main army of Great Xia. He was afraid that most of them would die. However, if he were to throw it here, it would be gone after it was used. Back then, the Empress had wiped out all the sarin gas stored by that organization. That organization's factory had also been bombed, so there was probably no chance for it to be produced again. Renbaqian lay on a big rock and looked at the blue sky and white clouds above his head. He was unhurriedly thinking. The Empress was sitting not far away. Some of the 300 winged cavalry warriors dispersed to prepare to receive that group of people, while others hunted in the mountains. They waited from morning to night. Everyone had been waiting here for a day and a half. At this moment, someone suddenly shouted from afar. The winged cavalry warriors who were preparing to slaughter looked up with joy. Are they here? Renbaqian tilted his head to look at their reaction and thought to himself. Very quickly, a group of goat riders came bouncing over from afar. A group of murderous burly men hopped forward on goats. The scene was very beautiful and could definitely shatter many people's fantasies about the profession of knights. If this were to be filmed, people would definitely not be able to look straight at it. However, Renbaqian had seen it many times over the past 2 days and was getting used to it. That kind of giant mountain goat was like a scamper. On flat ground, it wasn't as fast as a horse, but it was really good in the mountains. There were very few terrains that could stop it. Your Majesty, please forgive us for our tardiness. More than 100 people got off their mounts and knelt down on one knee. From the looks of it, they did not encounter any trouble. Their armor was not broken, and there were no bloodstains on their bodies. It's good that you are here. Get up, the Empress said faintly. After everyone stood up, the Empress asked, "Why are you only here now?" The Empress asked casually. After all, they didn't look like they had fought before. The captain's face twitched for a long time. He turned around and kicked the person behind him away before saying awkwardly, "That bastard led us the wrong way." The faces of the others also twitched for a long time. They all looked at the burly man from the corner of their eyes, as if they were looking at him with disdain. Renbochin looked at them from a short distance away and laughed out loud. If they weren't enemies, this group of fellows were actually rather simple and honest and cute. Even though they had the halo of being a pig teammate most of the time. Let's rest first. We will set off tomorrow morning. The Empress waved her hand to let them find a place to rest. Renbochin pondered for a long time, moved closer to the Empress and said, "It has already been 3 days. There are still 2 more days before we return. How long more do we have to walk in this mountain?" The Empress called Tingji over and inquired about it. Only then did she know that based on everyone's speed, they still needed 1.5 days to descend the mountain. Then, they would use half a day to pass through the plains and enter the next mountain range. Will the Great Xia army be waiting for us there? Renbochin inquired. Tingji revealed his white teeth and said, "We will just kill them all before heading over. After that, how do we go?" Renbochin asked again. Tingji looked at the Empress before replying, "After that, we will enter Mount Liaoning. After going over it, we will reach a gorge called the Falling Moon Gorge. There is a big river blocking the way. The widest part of the river is more than 1 kilometer. Furthermore, the river is turbulent and there are strange fish that eat people. There will probably be Great Xia soldiers blocking the way. Furthermore, according to the time, the experts from Great Xia will probably arrive by then. However, the good thing is that Hongwu will probably send experts from the army to wait for everyone there. After passing through that gorge, it will be the border. On the contrary, there won't be many intercepting forces there." This was because if they mobilized their army to intercept them, Dayo wouldn't just sit and watch. They would directly bypass Choyun Pass and destroy their anus. The commander-in-chief of Great Xia definitely wouldn't dare to do that. And no matter what, a small portion of manpower wouldn't be a match for over 400 winged cavalry warriors. Therefore, the most dangerous place was actually at the Falling Moon Gorge. After Renbochin heard what Tingji said, he became pensive. Previously, with just the 2 of them, they didn't need to prepare too much. With Qi Shui's speed, they didn't need to worry even if they took a detour. Now that there were so many of them, even though they were stronger, they were a bigger target. It was very easy for them to be tracked down. In that case, just like what Tingji said, there would definitely be a fierce battle later on. After Tingji left, Renbochin said to the Empress, "Why don't I go back now? This way, I can still go back once before we reach the Falling Moon Gorge and bring back some things. At the very least, I definitely need the antidote for the sarin gas. If it's according to what Commandanting said, I'm afraid that we will have to use up the remaining sarin gas at the Falling Moon Gorge." "All right." The Empress looked at him and nodded her head. At this moment, there were still a few hundred winged cavalry warriors around. With the Empress overseeing this place, she naturally couldn't leave with him. After informing the Empress, Renbochin found a secluded place and immediately disappeared. No one noticed him. That night, when they were having dinner, everyone realized that the scoundrel who had always been by the Empress's side had disappeared. However, everyone didn't care about it. If that guy was going to die, everyone would still applaud and celebrate. At this moment, the Empress sent someone to inform everyone to set off tomorrow. After all, Qi Shui's speed was very fast. Furthermore, it wouldn't be a problem for it to travel day and night in the mountains. They would still be able to make it in time to set off at night. When Renbaqian returned to Earth, he immediately appeared in the living room. Before he could do anything, he heard someone talking in the Empress's room. Without thinking, he knew that it was the housekeeper. Fortunately, the housekeeper wasn't in the living room at this moment. Otherwise, he would have scared the hell out of her. In the past, it was still all right. He would come once every 3 days, and it would always be in the middle of the night. Ever since he could choose between 2.5 to 5 days, the time of departure and return was no longer fixed. He couldn't guarantee that he would suddenly appear in front of the housekeeper one day. At that time, he would even have to pay for the housekeeper's medical expenses. With these thoughts in mind, he quietly walked to the door, opened and closed it. "Mr. Ren, you are back." A head immediately popped out from the door. "Yeah." Renbaqian nodded his head. He minded his own business and went up to the second floor. He took a bath first and pondered what he should bring along as he bathed. It would be great if he had the strength of 800 kilograms like the Aboriginals. A ton of TNT could even flatten half a mountain, let alone the Great Xia army. If the Empress fired a Gatling gun with 700 to 800 kilograms of bullets, he could sit on Qi Shui and play the background music. The background music of bravely charging into Deadly Island would suffice. It was a pity that he only had the strength of 160 kilograms, which was the strength of an ordinary man. Those who did manual labor often had more strength than him. Chapter 211. After taking a bath and changing his clothes, Renbaqian felt much more refreshed. He gave Su Shan a call. He had saved her number after she called him previously. "Lucky boy, what's the matter?" "I'm busy right now," Su Shan immediately said after the call was connected. This lucky fellow had become Renbaqian's good friend. After all, he was always the one who brought good things. Even when he was poisoned, he was able to cure leukemia, a world-class terminal illness. Furthermore, he was still safe and sound in the end. At this point in time, Renbaqian had the feeling of someone who used to call him Xiao Tian Tian when they were together, but now called him Madame Niu. Now that the antidote was in her hands, she turned her back on him. "I want the antidote made from nightshade and pralidoxime to neutralize the neurotoxin. I must have it. Enough for 1,000 people." Renbaqian even included the giant goat mounts. "Why do you need so much?" Su Shan was a little surprised. This thing wasn't difficult to obtain, but Renbaqian specifically mentioned that it was used to detoxify the neurotoxin. Furthermore, it was for 1,000 people. It was inevitable that she would be surprised. "I'm useful. The sooner, the better. How long will it take?" "You can report the expenses to me when the time comes," Renbaqian said directly. "The hospital has it, but it's too big. I have to ask my classmate for help. Maybe the day after tomorrow." "All right, I will go and collect it the day after tomorrow." Renbaqian hung up the phone after he finished speaking. He sat in front of the computer and began to search for information on various weapons. Although he still had 10 kilograms of sarin gas on hand, it would be gone once he used it up. It would be very difficult to get more. He looked up the modern fog on the internet. In fact, there were many things that could be used, such as white phosphorus bombs and solid gasoline bombs. They were not heavy, but they were very lethal. This was especially true for the soldiers outside the bunker. The people of this world had no concept of what this thing was, nor did they know how to avoid it. If it was directly thrown at them, they probably wouldn't even react. If he were to encounter another expert who could strike down with a sword flower, the scene would be too horrible to look at. The only drawback was that it was too inhumane. If it was the Rinpoche who had just arrived in this world, he wouldn't have even thought about using such a weapon. But now, he had seen many dead people, and he was becoming more and more indifferent to human life. Rinpoche looked around and sighed. There were many good things, but it was a pity that he couldn't get his hands on any of them. Rinpoche increasingly felt that the restrictions were too great. Whenever he wanted to use something, he found that he could only think about it. Even the sarin gas was snatched from that organization by the Empress's formidable strength. He closed the page that was searching for weapons and began to search for other things. For example, drones. These things were more or less useful. At the very least, they could see where the enemy's forces were and where the enemy's weaknesses were at a glance. Of course, it was very likely that the enemy's weaknesses were actually the enemy's experts. However, it was more or less useful as a reference. This kind of thing was sold in the city. After checking online, he went downstairs and drove there. Half an hour later, Rinpoche came out with 2 boxes that cost more than 40,000 yuan each. It could fly for 27 minutes, and its horizontal flight speed was 94 kilometers per hour. In other words, it could travel more than 20 kilometers in a single direction before returning. It was much more powerful than what Rinpoche had imagined. However, the wireless signal of the drone could only travel 5 kilometers at most. This was the current limit. Moreover, there were no satellites or networks, so it could only send back pictures. Perhaps there was something better, but it was not available now. 5 kilometers was more than enough for Rinpoche. Before the other party discovered him, he was already able to clearly see through the other party's arrangements. This kind of equipment was simply too powerful in that world where there wasn't any interference. In the future, if he were to get a few drones and place them at the front line, he would be able to detect the enemy's every move. Other than the drones, he also bought some spare batteries so that he could rotate them and use them when needed. After which, he went to buy 5 binoculars, 10 walkie-talkies, 2 solar power batteries, and a set of solar panels. Only then was everything ready. When he was driving back, he saw a few young men and women dressed in cosplay clothes by the roadside. They seemed to be students. One of the girls was wearing a red Han Chinese dress with a phoenix embroidered on it. Rinpoche fell in love with it at first glance. The Empress would definitely look very beautiful in it. Rinpoche parked his car by the roadside and jogged to the few of them. They immediately looked at him vigilantly, especially when they noticed that he had stopped his car just now. Did he come to strike up a conversation because he felt that he was rich? There were many such incidents in novels and on television. Especially recently, there was an incident of placing drinks on the roof of a car to represent the price. These students were very hostile to people who drove to strike up a conversation. "Excuse me, may I know where the clothes are made?" Rinpoche greeted the few of them with a smile. His tone was very polite and he pointed to the young lady who was surrounded in the middle. In fact, the young lady in the middle was also the prettiest. She had an exquisite face and fair skin. In particular, the red Han Chinese dress that she was wearing accentuated her temperament very well. Many people around her had their eyes on her. On the 2nd floor of Tianlong Shopping Mall, there is a shop that specializes in custom-made clothes called Xiaozi's shop. The young lady's voice was soft and very pleasing to the ear. "Thank you." Rinpoche smiled at the few of them, turned around, returned to his car, and drove away. The few of them looked at each other in dismay. They thought that Rinpoche was here to strike up a conversation. They didn't expect that he would just ask where the clothes were made and leave immediately. This made them a little surprised, but they still relaxed. The young lady who was surrounded in the middle smiled warmly. She felt that these people were indeed thinking too much. Just now, even she thought that Rinpoche was here to strike up a conversation. Even though she felt disgusted, she was also a little happy. At this moment, when she relaxed, she felt a little disappointed. Rinpoche drove directly to the shopping mall that the young lady mentioned and found the shop inside. There were a lot of clothes in the shop, but they weren't commonly seen in the market. Instead, they were cosplay and some ancient costumes. This made this shop very conspicuous. Everyone who passed by would take a few glances at it, but very few people went in. Rinpoche went in and told her what he wanted. It was a red Han Chinese dress with a phoenix embroidered with gold thread. Rinpoche even thought of embroidering the word emperor on the back of the dress, but after thinking that it was too Chinibyu, he gave up. After agreeing on the figure and the fabric of the dress, Rinpoche paid the deposit and could only collect it in half a month. Rinpoche wasn't in a hurry. He could collect it after returning to Dayo. Over the next 2 days, he first bought a Type 81 rifle and bullets. Now that he was considered an acquaintance, he asked them to send the rifle and bullets to a certain place, which saved him a lot of time. Next, he drove to an empty place to practice with the drone. Even though the shop assistant had demonstrated it to him, it was impossible not to practice more. He found a square and lifted the drone up. Immediately, many people came over to watch. They watched as he lifted the drone up, flew out, and crashed. The people around him sighed. "Young man, how much did you buy it?" Someone saw that he was having fun and casually asked. Rinpoche stretched out 4 fingers. 4,000. It's not cheap. It would be a pity if it broke like this. The old man shook his head. Rinpoche smiled, returned to the car, and took out the other one. This time around, he managed to avoid the same mistake as the previous time and returned safely. This greatly boosted his confidence. He played with it for a long time before putting it away. The next morning, he went to the laboratory and bought another drone. Then, he carried the music player, headphones, a gun, and a big and small bag back to that world. Chapter 212. The Empress didn't know how long she had been sitting there. When she saw Rinpoche, her eyes widened. She looked at him and paused for a moment. After all, his current appearance was very strange. He had a bag hanging in front of his chest, a bag on his back, a gun hanging on his body, headphones stuffed in his ears, and 2 bags in his hands. He looked like a refugee. Rinpoche placed the bags on the ground, climbed onto a rock, and sat beside the Empress. He took out a headphone and stuffed it into her ear. Then, he said warmly, "Have you waited for long?" The Empress ignored him and listened to the music coming from the headphone. There were too many things in that world that she had not come into contact with. She wouldn't be too surprised by anything she saw now. In any case, Rinpoche would explain it to her. A warm female voice was transmitted into her ears. Although she couldn't understand the meaning, the melody was very warm. This was a very healing song. If the name was translated, it would be called a gentle poem. Rinpoche used to like listening to it and wanted to share it with the Empress. Sharing something that he liked with the Empress was a kind of joy to him. The 2 of them sat on the rock and listened to the gentle song. The impending battle seemed to have gone far away from them. The mountain breeze was much warmer. "It's a very strange language," the Empress said. "It's from a small island nation in the east of our world. Some things are still valuable." Rinpoche naturally wouldn't say what the most valuable thing was. He would be beaten to death. "What is it singing?" the Empress asked again. Although the melody was a little strange, it was common in that world. On the contrary, it was rarely heard in Dayo and Great Xia. However, the Empress still felt that it was very nice to listen to. She felt warm after listening to it. Fortunately, Renbachian could roughly remember the translated meaning of the lyrics. He then explained it to the Empress. The Empress nodded and said, "Sing it for me. Wait for me to learn it. I don't know their language." Renbachian laughed. Then, he said with a slight flaunt, "But I know how to play pomp and circumstance with the arrow." He learned the arrow from his grandfather. His technique wasn't considered proficient, but he practiced pomp and circumstance pretty well. When his younger brother heard it, his evaluation was, "The arrow has become a spirit." The Empress didn't think much of the words pomp and circumstance. She nodded her head and said, "Okay." Renbachian was overjoyed when he thought of playing pomp and circumstance for the Empress. "Let's go." The Empress took off her earphones and disappeared from the rock without exerting any force. She immediately appeared a few steps away. "I brought back some good stuff this time." Renbachian then remembered to inform the Empress, "Besides the antidote, we also have binoculars that allow us to see very far away." He took out a pair of binoculars from his bag, opened the front cover of the binoculars, made a few gestures, and passed it to the Empress. "It should be useful for reconnaissance." The Empress imitated Renbachian's actions and placed the binoculars in front of her eyes. She could see places that were very far away as if they were right in front of her. This made her feel a little unaccustomed to it. After taking a look at her surroundings, she slowly familiarized herself with the binoculars. The corners of her mouth curled up slightly. It seemed like she really liked this thing. "Anything else?" "This is quite useful," the Empress said. "Not only this, there's also a walkie-talkie. It's just like a mobile phone and can be used for long-distance communication. This way, it'll be more convenient for us to contact each other." Renbachian took out a walkie-talkie, adjusted the channel, and passed it to the Empress. He also held one in his hand. "This can be used." The Empress was a little surprised. Didn't Renbachian say that it couldn't be used? However, her voice was transmitted directly from the walkie-talkie in Renbachian's hand. This can only be used within a short distance of about 3 kilometers. It should be sufficient for the current situation. Many times, it will be more convenient. You don't need to rely on shouting to relay messages anymore. I brought 10 of them. The Empress calculated that a distance of 3 kilometers was sufficient. In fact, it was a little too far for the current situation. If it was placed in the hands of the border army, it would then be able to display its true potential. With this, Hongwu could command the entire army like an extension of his arm. During wartime, it would play a huge role. Also, in terms of reconnaissance, it would be able to report the situation in a timely manner without having to run a few kilometers to report. The Empress immediately thought of these 2 points. Just based on these 2 points, the value of the walkie-talkie was already huge. "Bring more next time," the Empress said. Renbachian nodded his head. Following which, he picked up a bag and said, "There's still one more important thing, a drone. It can fly in the sky just like the plane that you have boarded before. It will be able to know the enemy's situation from 8 to 9 kilometers away." Upon hearing Renbachian's words, the Empress's eyes lit up again. The things that Renbachian brought back this time would indeed be very useful. Both of them sat on Qi Shui's back. The other bags were tied up with ropes and hung on both sides of Qi Shui. The originally mighty Kirin now looked like a mule that was carrying goods. This made Qi Shui groan non-stop. At the same time, it shook its body, trying to shake off the things. Originally, it could only accept the Empress. It could even tolerate Renbachian's presence. Now, it was being ordered around like an animal. No matter what, it was still a Kirin. Even though Renbachian always felt that its character was like a husky, it still had some self-respect. In the end, the Empress had to appease it before both of them set off. In the middle of the night, they saw a bonfire in the distance. When both of them walked closer, someone came out to greet them, "Your Majesty." Many people were alarmed by their arrival. When they greeted them, they couldn't help but cast sidelong glances at Renbochin. The Empress had been waiting for this fellow. She had waited until this moment to come. It was really too much, and everyone felt that it was inconceivable. However, when they thought about how the Empress had come to Great Xia, they could only sigh. When they set off again, another day had passed. Finally, everyone arrived at the border of Mount Yuyang. After crossing over the mountain ridge in front, they would arrive at a plain. It would take half a day to cross over and enter Mount Lianin. Everyone guessed that there would be Great Xia soldiers intercepting them on this plain. However, there wouldn't be too many of them and there wouldn't be any experts. After all, they didn't have enough time to make arrangements. However, to be on the safe side, the Empress called the 3 captains over and asked Renbochin to take out 9 binoculars from his bag to distribute to them. What's this? For the past few days, everyone had ignored Renbochin. At this moment, they finally asked. 10x binoculars. If you can see a small dot 500 meters away but can't see clearly what it is, this binoculars can zoom in on that object to a range of 50 meters. Simply put, it allows you to see further and see things that are 10 times further away. Renbochin explained to the 3 captains. Looking at their bewildered expressions, he had no choice but to place the binoculars in front of his eyes to demonstrate to everyone. Then, he passed the binoculars to them for them to try. With a puzzled look on his face, Tingji took the binoculars and placed them in front of his eyes to take a look. He couldn't see anything, it was as if it was blocked by something. Renbochin looked at Tingji, who was using the binoculars to look at himself. He helplessly pointed to a distant place and said, "Look over there." Tingji turned the binoculars in a certain direction and immediately got a shock. The thing that was tens of meters away seemed to be right in front of his eyes. It made his hands tremble and he almost threw the binoculars away. Renbochin passed the other 2 binoculars to the other 2 captains. When the 2 of them saw Tingji getting a shock, they were somewhat baffled. In the end, when they used the binoculars to look at the distant things, their reactions were exactly the same as Tingji's. It was as if the head of the person that was tens of meters away was right in front of their eyes. Looking at the 3 of them hugging the binoculars as if they were treasures, Renbochin took out another pair of binoculars and demonstrated to them how to adjust the magnification. Only after this did the few of them know how to use the binoculars. Soon after, they held the binoculars and looked into the distance, having a great time. One could imagine the shock that the binoculars brought to the people of this era. Its value was simply too great. After a long time, they put down the binoculars and looked at Renbochin again. No matter what, this was really a good thing. The surprise that Renbochin gave them was not over yet. Next, he took out a night vision goggles. He only brought one with him. Night vision goggles. Even in the pitch-black night, you can still see living creatures and people. You can clearly see everything within a radius of 1 kilometer. Just as Renbochin's voice faded away, the goggles were snatched away by someone. This cannot be used during the day as it is easily damaged. It will only be effective at night. Give it to the sentries. Renbochin promptly warned. After hearing this, the 3 of them suppressed their thoughts. Soon after, their gazes landed on Renbochin again. They did not know if Renbochin would be able to take out anything else because Renbochin was holding on to a few bags. This is a walkie-talkie. I'll give it to the 6 of you. You can communicate within a radius of 1 kilometer. Renbochin took the walkie-talkie and said. However, the few of them were still unable to understand this thing. After Renbochin adjusted the channel of a walkie-talkie, he passed it to Tingji. Go to a place that is 300 feet away and speak to it. Tingji nodded his head. With one hand tightly holding onto the binoculars and the other hand holding onto the walkie-talkie, he moved and appeared 30 feet away. In less than 3 seconds, he was already 300 feet away, which was a distance of about 100 meters. Soon after, he held onto the walkie-talkie and looked at it for a long time. Then, he heard a voice coming from the small box in his hand. Did you hear that? Immediately, he was shocked. This voice came from the box and the owner of the voice was still sitting at the same place. Ah! Tingji's surprised voice came from the walkie-talkie. The other two captains looked at Tingji, who was a distance away, and then looked at the small box in Renbochin's hand. Say something. Ren. Deputy Prefect Ren, Tingji stuttered. Even an Earth will level captain stuttered. It could be seen how he was feeling right now. He was a little nervous and felt that this small box would suck him in and lock him up. Come back. Renbochin's voice fell. In less than 3 seconds, Tingji appeared beside everyone. This is the function of this thing. It can be used to communicate from a distance. However, it can only be used for 12 hours. After that, it needs to be recharged. Therefore, it can only be turned on when it is needed and switched off when it is not in use. Renbochin demonstrated to everyone. This time, everyone looked at Renbochin as if they were looking at a deity. Originally, they didn't understand why Her Majesty found such a weakling and even took such a huge risk to come to Great Xia for him. After everyone received the Empress, they viewed Renbochin with hostility. However, at this moment, those thoughts were already thrown out of their minds. Renbochin casually took out these few things that they had never seen or heard of before, and they were already shocked. Chapter 213. Early the next morning, everyone climbed over the ridge. The 3 winged cavalry warriors and the 3 captains with binoculars raised their heads, puffed out their chests, and ran to the front to investigate. Renbochin sat on Qi Shui's back and listened to the walkie-talkie sound. There's no ambush at the foot of the mountain. There's no ambush in the east. There's no ambush in the west. South, north, the wind is really noisy today, yeah. Voice X5. Behind them, Renbochin was speechless. Are you guys here to play? This bunch of people took the binoculars and walkie-talkies and jumped up and down like monkeys. If I give you guys the drones, will you still want to fly? Also, the batteries of the walkie-talkies won't last long, right? If this goes on, I'm afraid that before we see the Great Xia army, we will be out of battery. Also, who said that the wind is really noisy? Are you a drama queen? The Empress couldn't be bothered with them and let them do whatever they wanted. Renbochin thought that it was fortunate that he had charged the solar battery beforehand. Otherwise, he would have to carry a solar panel along the way. After a while, everyone descended the mountain. Indeed, as mentioned, there wasn't any ambush. They couldn't see anyone within 40 to 50 kilometers. They couldn't see anything further. Renbochin heaved a sigh of relief. He didn't really like fighting. Of course, this had something to do with his weak skills. Even if he was holding a Type 81 rifle, he didn't have much sense of security. God knew if a stray arrow would fly out of nowhere. A group of goat riders ran wildly on the plain. This plain was more than 100 kilometers wide, and it would take them half a day to cross it. Renbochin sat on Qi Shui's back and felt that the sun was a little harsh today. He conveniently put on a pair of sunglasses and immediately felt a lot cooler. At the same time, he turned around and put a pair of gold-rimmed sunglasses on the Empress's nose. Together with Qi Shui, the two of them stood out among a group of goat riders. It was as if two Lamborghini owners had sneaked into a gathering of Alto owners. There are people in front. They are the mounted scouts of the Great Xia army. Just when they could see the outline of the mountain in the distance, a voice suddenly came from the walkie-talkie. At this moment, the others could only see a few small dots when they looked in that direction. If they didn't pay attention, they wouldn't be able to detect them. However, they could see clearly with binoculars that a few mounted scouts dressed in Great Xia's military uniforms were in front of them. They were standing on their horses and looking in this direction. After all, hundreds of goat knights stirred up a lot of dust when they ran past, and it could be seen from afar. By the time they were within a distance of 4 to 5 kilometers, they could already see very clearly with their binoculars. They could almost see the expressions on the faces of the Great Xia scouts. At this point in time, there were already scouts from Great Xia who rode their horses back to report the news. There were still 2 or 3 scouts who remained at the same spot. They only turned their horses around when they were 1.5 kilometers away from Great Xia. They weren't afraid of being caught up by the winged cavalry. These goats ran slower than horses on flat ground. If they turned around and ran now, they would be able to leave the group of goat riders behind and still be able to see their backs. "Your Majesty, they have entered the forest," Ting Ji said through the walkie-talkie. Having this thing was really too convenient. But even if he didn't say it, the others could also see that in front of them was a forest and a slope, and behind it was the mountain pass. "Are they going to ambush us in the forest?" "Your Majesty, give me 100 men, and I will kill them all," another captain said with contempt. His name was Zheng Hu. Other than him and Ting Ji, there was another officer. His name was very elegant, and he was called Li Tanhua. His name was elegant, and his appearance was much fairer than the others. However, even though he was a man of few words, he gave off a feeling that he was the kind of person that was very dependable. "Let's just kill our way over. If we were to form a formation on flat ground, it would be slightly more troublesome, but in the forest, it would be courting death," Ting Ji said. After all, in a complex environment like the forest, the combat power of the Aboriginal warriors could be greatly enhanced. Since the other party couldn't form a formation, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that they were courting death. "They definitely have some tricks up their sleeves," Li Tanhua said coldly. It wasn't that the others didn't know that the other party definitely had some tricks up their sleeves, but with more than 400 Earth-will experts and in such an environment like the forest, they weren't worried even if there were 10,000 soldiers lying in ambush. Their formidable strength allowed them to directly disregard the intentions of the other party and just crush their way over. Everyone was less than 5 kilometers away from the forest. Using the binoculars, they could already see the indistinct silhouettes of the soldiers in the forest. Ting Ji put down the binoculars and sneered, "These people actually dare to obstruct us, they are really courting death. Your Majesty, why don't we investigate? After all, they definitely have a reason for doing this. Even though we aren't afraid of them, it would be a pity if there were casualties when the other party is well prepared." Rinpochen turned his head and said to the Empress. Even if those Aboriginal warriors knew that there was a trap, they still wanted to rely on their formidable strength to crush their way over. He didn't want to know that the other party had a trap and still step into it. The others were still fine, but he always felt that he was the one in the greatest danger. What if someone jumped out from the forest and stabbed him with a knife or a crossbow? He was almost turned into a sieve by someone some time ago. "Stop!" the Empress shouted softly, and everyone immediately slowed down and stopped. At this moment, everyone could practically see the reflection of light in the forest with their naked eyes. The other party didn't seem to have any intention of hiding and was just waiting to intercept them. They used the binoculars to take a look, and sure enough, they saw rows of soldiers drawing their bows and knocking arrows in between the trees. There seemed to be many other figures in the forest. "Your Majesty, we can directly crush these people and crush them." Ting Ji cupped his fists and said. The Empress turned her head and looked at Renbochin to see what he had to say. Renbochin felt that it was time for him to show off his skills. He always felt that the great Xia commander wouldn't be so stupid as to rely on the archers and soldiers in the forest to obstruct them. After all, those who could lead troops into battle wouldn't be fools. Even if he was a fool, the people beside him wouldn't be fools, right? Renbochin jumped down from the Kirin's back, took off a bag and placed it on the ground. He took out the deformed drone from the bag and didn't forget to turn his head and tell everyone, "Help me block them." Renbochin was afraid that if someone noticed him, they would shoot down an arrow. He didn't forget the time when the Empress shot down Ning Caichen's flying sword with an arrow. More than 400 winged cavalry warriors lined up in 2 rows and stared straight at the forest opposite them. In the forest, the commander of Great Xia stroked his beard and looked at the goat riders in formation. He was puzzled and said, "Why aren't these aboriginals coming in yet?" According to the style of the aboriginals, even if there was a mountain of daggers or a sea of flames in front of them, they would still charge in, let alone these archers. "The few of you, go and take a look outside the forest." That commander waved his hand, and a few scouts who had just returned spurred their horses out of the forest. They purposely made a round outside the forest, resembling a prostitute leaning against a brothel who was throwing flirtatious glances and saying, "Sir, come and play." Many of the winged cavalry warriors saw this scene and immediately became restless. However, with the Empress's orders, they didn't move at all. Behind the crowd, the 3 captains and the Empress watched as Renbochin fiddled with a strange thing that looked like a spider. Renbochin installed the display screen and remote control. Following his control, the drone on the ground began to rise into the sky. The 3 captains' eyeballs almost popped out. This thing actually flew. The 3 of them raised their heads and looked at the sky. Chapter 2:14. At this moment, Renbochin was controlling the remote control. At this moment, the drone could no longer be seen. Following his control, a bird's-eye view of the forest appeared on the screen. At this moment, a palm-sized box with 2 antennas was placed on the ground under his feet. It was the ground terminal, and it could transmit and receive data up to 1.7 kilometers. Within this range, he could transmit photos back. If he only controlled the drone, he could reach a distance of 5 kilometers. It was a pity that there was no internet, and they could only rely on the ground to transmit data. They could only transmit photos within 1.7 kilometers. If there was an internet connection, he would be able to send the video directly. Renbochin piloted the drone and advanced toward the forest. He kept taking pictures and transmitting the pictures back. On the screen, he could clearly see the silhouettes of some people in the shade of the trees below. Renbochin smelled a burst of fragrance. The Empress had already moved closer to his side and was looking at the photos on the screen together with him. The 3 captains were anxious, but they didn't dare to get close to the Empress because they didn't know what they could see. As the distance of the drone exceeded the data transmission range of the ground station, the screen stopped at the last photo. Renbochin zoomed in on the lower left corner of the location map and focused on flying the drone to take photos. He would check it again when the drone returned. Many of the winged cavalry warriors turned their heads to look when they heard the noise of the drone taking off just now. They saw that strange-looking thing fly into the sky and then disappear. Out of curiosity, they turned their heads to look at Renbochin, who was concentrating on piloting the drone. Previously, the walkie-talkies and binoculars were already an eye-opener for them. In just one day, more than 400 people already knew about it. Their opinions of Renbochin immediately changed significantly. At this moment, everyone was curious about what Deputy Prefect Ren was up to. At this moment, in the forest, the great Xia general had a suspicious look on his face. Those aboriginals had stopped a few kilometers away and hadn't moved at all. What exactly were they doing? Even when the scouts went out for a spin, they didn't react. Something was wrong. Unable to restrain himself, he landed on a tree branch and looked into the distance. Unfortunately, he could only see some small black dots and nothing else. As soon as he descended from the tree, a messenger ran over from behind. "Adjunct Liu, the commandant is asking what happened?" Those aboriginals stopped moving a few kilometers away. "I am also very puzzled. However, since we are guarding the mountain pass, they must pass through here. Otherwise, they will have to make a big detour. Inform the commandant that as long as they arrive, they will act according to the plan." This general was Liu Kanjun, who was refused an audience with the Azure Yang sect master. He was also the one who proposed the ambush. The commandant was the highest-ranking military officer in the vicinity of Yu City. He was in charge of a total of 4,000 soldiers and horses. In Great Xia, there were more than 100 of such military stations. They were distributed in various cities of Great Xia, with a maximum of 6,000 soldiers and a minimum of 2,000 soldiers. As for the county towns, the military would send a battalion of 750 soldiers to be stationed and rotated there. On the other hand, a team of 150 soldiers was stationed in an ordinary county. This time, the county commandant had gathered all the troops from Yu City, including the troops stationed in the various counties. This was because the higher-ups had already passed down an order to keep Qi Zixiao in Great Xia no matter what. Qi Zixiao and the winged cavalry had entered Mount Yuyang, which was right next to Yu City. They had no choice but to come. Otherwise, they would be accused of avoiding the battle. Not only would they be beheaded, but their entire families would also be exiled. As for the sect leader of the Azure Sun sect, he was currently with the county commandant. His head was about to roll on the ground, so why would he care if he saw him or not? On the second day, the army sent troops to surround the Azure Sun sect. They would either send reinforcements or kill the Azure Sun sect first. His head was about to fall to the ground, so why would he care about anything else? Ren Baqin maneuvered the drone and circled above the forest. It flew deeper into the forest for a distance before turning back. A group of winged cavalry warriors turned their heads and watched the drone land behind them. Their hearts were scratching like a cat. What exactly was that thing? In particular, the three captains were as anxious as monkeys. Ren Baqin ignored them, took out the memory card from the drone, inserted it into the card reader, connected it to the tablet computer on the remote control, and began to look at the photos taken by the drone. The first few photos were taken at the beginning, and not much could be seen. However, as the drone gradually went deeper into the forest, more and more things could be seen through the shade of the trees. Ah! Ren Baqin's finger stopped on the tablet computer. He looked at a photo and exclaimed in surprise. Following which, he enlarged the photo and saw a scarecrow in the shade of the trees. It was wearing the uniform of a Great Xia soldier, and it was really difficult to recognize it from afar. Looking back at the previous photo, he saw that only the first few rows of soldiers in the forest were real, while the rest were scarecrows. Since Ren Baqin could see it, the Empress could naturally see it as well. Her eyes revealed a suspicious look. What were they doing with these dummies in the forest? If they set fire to the surroundings and the back of the barrels, in addition to the fact that it was late autumn in Great Xia, the air was dry, and a large number of fallen leaves were spread in the forest. The wooden barrels that were prepared on the mountain were the same. On one hand, they could set fire to obstruct the winged cavalry. On the other hand, the oil was very slippery and could more or less impede the winged cavalry's speed. The same was true for those traps. If the winged cavalry really barged in like this, it could be imagined that even if they were all earth-will experts, they would still lose some men due to the fire, thick smoke, and their interception. Even if the winged cavalry could rush in and kill the other party, those mounts would probably be turned into roasted lambs, and the rest of the journey wouldn't be easy. For the sake of Rinpoche and the others, the other party directly set fire to the forest and burned the mountain. It was really vicious. After luring us in, they want to set fire to the forest and intercept us halfway up the mountain, Rinpoche said to the Empress. The Empress nodded her head slightly. She had seen those photos just now and could naturally guess what was going on. After looking at them, she turned around and returned to the back of Qi Shui. Rinpoche waved at the three captains and showed them the photos one by one. They had heard what Rinpoche said before, but they couldn't see the photos and didn't know what the other party's arrangements were. When they saw the photos on the screen, they were shocked by the scene that seemed like they had seen it with their own eyes. They subconsciously turned their heads to look at that strange thing. The three of them could guess that this scene was brought back by that strange thing, but they couldn't figure out how exactly it did it. At the same time, the tablet in Rinpoche's hand that allowed them to see these photos made them feel like a divine artifact. It was even more divine than the binoculars. As the photos were shown to them one by one, the three of them frowned at first. Following which, they flew into a rage and said, "Bastards, they actually want to burn us to death. We must cut them into 8 pieces." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.